How America's Final States Completed the Union, 1889 to 1959. Picture this, it is January 3, 1959, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower sits in the Oval Office, his pen poised over a document that will forever change the American flag. With a single signature, he will welcome Alaska as the 49th state, followed just months later by Hawaii as the 50th. After 170 years of expansion, the United States of America will finally be complete. But this moment of completion represents the culmination of a remarkable 70-year journey that began in 1889 with the admission of 4 states in a single year. The modern era of American statehood, spanning from 1889 to 1959, tells the story of how America filled in its final frontiers, extended democracy to its most remote territories, and ultimately achieved the 50-state union we know today. It was an era unlike any other in American expansion. Gone were the days of manifest destiny and continental conquest. Instead, this period was characterized by the systematic organization of remaining territories, the resolution of long-standing political obstacles, and the extension of statehood to lands that had been American territories for decades. It was a time when America looked inward to complete what it had begun, rather than outward to acquire new lands. The 26 states that joined the Union during this modern era, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska, and Hawaii, represent the final chapter in the American story of territorial expansion. Each of these states faced unique challenges in achieving statehood, from the Mormon question in Utah to the racial complexities of Hawaii, from the harsh climate of Alaska to the Native American populations of Oklahoma. It is the story of how America completed itself, how a nation that had stretched from sea to shining sea finally filled in all the spaces in between and beyond. It is a story of persistence and patience, of political maneuvering and moral evolution, of technological advancement and cultural change. Most importantly, it is the story of how American democracy proved flexible enough to accommodate the diverse peoples and landscapes that would complete the American Union. Chapter 1. The Great Admission of 1889 to 1890. The year 1889 marked a watershed moment in American statehood, as 4 territories achieved statehood in rapid succession. North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington all became states within just 8 months, representing the most significant single expansion of the Union since the original 13 colonies joined the Union. This remarkable burst of state-making was the result of decades of territorial development, political maneuvering, and the resolution of long-standing obstacles to statehood. The story begins with the Dakota Territory, which had been organized in 1861 but had struggled for decades to achieve the population and political stability necessary for statehood. The territory encompassed an enormous area that included present-day North Dakota, South Dakota, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. The sparse population, harsh climate, and ongoing conflicts with Native American tribes had delayed statehood for nearly 3 decades. However, the 1880s brought dramatic changes to the Dakota Territory. The completion of the Northern Pacific Railway in 1883 opened the region to large-scale settlement, while the discovery of gold in the Black Hills and the development of wheat farming on the northern plains attracted thousands of new residents. The population of the territory grew from fewer than 15,000 in 1870 to more than 500,000 by 1889. The question of whether Dakota should be admitted as one state or two became a major political issue during the 1880s. The southern portion of the territory, centered around Sioux Falls and Pierre, had developed differently from the northern portion, centered around Bismarck and Fargo. The southern region was more agricultural and had stronger ties to Nebraska and Iowa. In contrast, the northern region was more focused on wheat farming and had closer connections to Minnesota and Wisconsin. Political considerations also played a crucial role in the decision to divide Dakota. The Republican Party, which controlled Congress in 1889, recognized that 2 Republican states would provide 4 senators instead of 2, strengthening their position in the closely divided Senate. The Democrats, while opposing the division in principle, were unable to prevent it given their minority status. The process of dividing Dakota Territory required careful negotiation over boundaries, the division of territorial debts and assets, and the location of state capitals. The boundary between the two states was set at the 46th parallel, while Pierre was designated as the capital of South Dakota and Bismarck became the capital of North Dakota. North Dakota was admitted to the Union on November 2, 1889, followed by South Dakota on the same day. President Benjamin Harrison deliberately shuffled the statehood proclamations so that no one would know which state was technically admitted first. However, North Dakota is generally considered the 39th state and South Dakota the 40th based on alphabetical order. Montana's path to statehood was equally complex, involving decades of territorial status, conflicts over mining rights, and political battles between different regions of the territory. Montana Territory was organized in 1864 following the discovery of gold in the region. However, its development was hindered by its remote location, harsh climate, and ongoing conflicts with Native American tribes. The discovery of copper in Butte during the 1870s transformed Montana's economy and attracted thousands of new residents. The development of the Anaconda Copper Mining Company led to the creation of one of the world's most significant mining operations, providing the economic foundation for statehood. However, the concentration of economic power in the hands of a few mining companies also created political tensions that would influence Montana politics for decades to come. The question of Montana's capital became a significant issue during the statehood process. Helena, which had grown wealthy from gold mining, competed with Anaconda, which was the center of the copper industry. The rivalry between these two cities reflected broader tensions between different economic interests and regions within the territory. Montana was admitted to the Union on November 8, 1889, as the 41st state, with Helena designated as the capital after a bitter political battle. The state's constitution reflected the influence of the mining industry while also including progressive provisions related to women's rights and labor relations. Its unique geography and economic development shaped Washington's journey to statehood. Washington Territory was organized in 1853, but its development was initially slow due to its remote location and the dominance of the Hudson's Bay Company in the region. The discovery of gold in the Klondike and the development of the lumber industry during the 1880s attracted new settlers, providing the economic foundation for statehood. The territory's location on the Pacific coast gave it strategic importance for trade with Asia. At the same time, the development of railroads connecting Washington to the rest of the country facilitated economic growth. The completion of the Northern Pacific Railway to Tacoma in 1883 and the Great Northern Railway to Seattle in 1893 transformed Washington into a central hub for transportation. Washington was admitted to the Union on November 11, 1889, as the 42nd state, with Olympia as its capital. The state's constitution included progressive provisions related to women's suffrage and environmental protection, reflecting the influence of reform movements in the Pacific Northwest. The admission of these four states in 1889 represented more than just the addition of new territory to the Union. It marked the completion of the continental United States as a political entity, with organized state governments extending from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The new states brought diverse populations, economies, and cultures that enriched the American nation while also creating new challenges for federal governance. The Great Admission of 1889 to 1890 also demonstrated the maturation of the American territorial system. The process of territorial organization, development, and admission to statehood had become more systematic and predictable, with clear criteria for population, economic development, and political organization. This systematization would influence the admission of the remaining territories in the decades that followed. However, the admission of these four states also revealed ongoing tensions and contradictions within American democracy. The decision to divide Dakota Territory was motivated primarily by partisan political considerations rather than the wishes of territorial residents. The influence of mining and railroad companies in Montana and Washington raised questions about corporate power and democratic governance that would become increasingly important in the Progressive era. The new states also faced significant challenges in establishing effective governments and integrating diverse populations. The harsh climate and sparse population of the northern plains created unique challenges for democratic governance. In contrast, the rapid economic development of the western states created boom and bust cycles that tested the stability of state institutions. Despite these challenges, the admission of North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington marked a crucial milestone in American development. These states would play important roles in American agriculture, mining, and transportation, while their political representatives would influence national policy for generations to come. The Great Admission of 1889 to 1890 thus represents both the culmination of 19th-century expansion and the beginning of a new phase in American development. Chapter 2: The Struggle for Statehood in the Intermountain West. The 1890s brought the admission of three more western states, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah, each of which faced unique challenges in achieving statehood. These states represented the completion of American settlement in the Intermountain West, the region between the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada that had long been considered unsuitable for large-scale settlement. Idaho's path to statehood was complicated by its diverse geography and economy, which included mining in the north, agriculture in the south, and vast wilderness areas throughout the territory. Idaho Territory was organized in 1863 following the discovery of gold, but its boundaries had been repeatedly modified as other territories were established from its original area. The development of silver mining in the Coeur d'Alene region during the 1880s provided the economic foundation for statehood. At the same time, the completion of railroad connections to the rest of the country facilitated population growth and economic development. However, the territory was also plagued by labor conflicts in the mining industry that created political instability and raised questions about the territory's readiness for statehood. The Coeur d'Alene labor wars of the 1890s involved violent conflicts between miners and mine owners that required federal intervention to restore order. These conflicts reflected broader tensions between labor and capital that were emerging throughout the American West during this period. The violence and instability in the mining regions raised concerns about Idaho's ability to maintain law and order. Despite these challenges, Idaho was admitted to the Union on July 3, 1890, as the 43rd state, with Boise as its capital. The state's constitution included provisions designed to prevent the concentration of economic power and to protect workers' rights, reflecting the influence of the labor conflicts that had preceded statehood. Wyoming's admission to the Union was notable for several reasons, including its small population, its significant role in the women's suffrage movement, and its unique economic dependence on cattle ranching. Wyoming Territory had been organized in 1868, but the territory's harsh climate and sparse population had delayed statehood for more than 2 decades. The development of the cattle industry during the 1870s and 1880s provided the economic foundation for Wyoming's growth. At the same time, the completion of the Union Pacific Railroad across the territory facilitated transportation and communication. However, the territory's population remained small, with fewer than 63,000 residents at the time of statehood, making it the least populous state to be admitted to the Union up to that time. Wyoming's most distinctive feature was its early adoption of women's suffrage. The territorial legislature had granted women the right to vote in 1869, making Wyoming the first jurisdiction in the United States to provide full voting rights to women. This progressive stance on women's rights was motivated, in part, by the desire to attract female settlers to the territory, and in part by a genuine belief in gender equality. The women's suffrage issue became a significant factor in Wyoming's statehood process, as some members of Congress opposed admitting a state that allowed women to vote. However, Wyoming's territorial representatives made it clear that they would rather remain a territory than give up women's suffrage, and Congress ultimately accepted Wyoming with its progressive voting laws intact. Wyoming was admitted to the Union on July 10, 1890, as the 44th state, with Cheyenne as its capital. The state's constitution enshrined women's suffrage and included other progressive provisions related to water rights and environmental protection. Wyoming's admission marked a significant milestone in the women's rights movement, demonstrating that Western territories could serve as laboratories for democratic innovation. Utah's path to statehood was the most complex and controversial of any American territory, involving decades of conflict over the practice of polygamy, the political power of the Mormon Church, and questions about the compatibility of Mormon society with American democratic institutions. The Utah Territory had been organized in 1850, but its unique religious and social characteristics had prevented it from achieving statehood for more than 4 decades. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormon Church, had established a distinctive society in the Great Basin that included the practice of plural marriage, a theocratic form of government, and economic institutions that differed significantly from those in the rest of the United States. These differences created ongoing conflicts with federal authorities and raised questions about Utah's fitness for statehood. The federal government's opposition to polygamy led to a series of laws designed to suppress the practice and reduce the political power of the Mormon Church. The Edmunds Act of 1882 and the Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887 disenfranchised polygamists, dissolved the Mormon Church as a legal entity, and confiscated church property. These measures created a crisis in Utah that threatened the survival of Mormon society. The resolution of the Utah question required significant compromises on both sides. The Mormon Church officially abandoned the practice of polygamy in 1890 through a manifesto issued by Church President Wilford Woodruff. This decision was controversial within the Mormon community but was necessary to achieve statehood and avoid further federal persecution. The abandonment of polygamy was accompanied by other changes in Mormon society, including the dissolution of the church-controlled People's Party and the organization of conventional Republican and Democratic parties in Utah. These changes demonstrated the Mormon community's willingness to adapt to American political norms to achieve statehood. Utah was admitted to the Union on January 4, 1896, as the 45th state, with Salt Lake City as its capital. The state's constitution prohibited polygamy and included provisions designed to separate church and state, though the Mormon Church continued to exercise significant influence in Utah politics and society. The admission of Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah completed the organization of the Intermountain West, demonstrating the flexibility of American federalism in accommodating diverse populations and cultures. Each of these states brought unique characteristics and challenges that enriched the American nation while also testing the limits of democratic governance. The labor conflicts in Idaho, the women's suffrage experiment in Wyoming, and the religious controversies in Utah all reflected broader societal tensions and changes in the United States during the 1890s. These states served as laboratories for democratic innovation and social experimentation that would influence national developments in the progressive era. However, the admission of these states also revealed ongoing limitations and contradictions within American democracy. The small populations of these western states gave them disproportionate representation in the Senate, while their economic dependence on extractive industries created vulnerabilities that would persist for generations to come. The completion of statehood in the Intermountain West also marked the end of the traditional frontier experience in American development. The admission of Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah filled in the last gaps in the continental United States, creating a continuous band of organized states from coast to coast. The completion of the continental nation would have profound implications for American identity and development in the 20th century. Chapter 3: The 20th Century and the Final Territories. The dawn of the 20th century brought new challenges and opportunities for American territorial expansion and the pursuit of statehood. The Spanish-American War of 1898 had given the United States new territories in the Caribbean and Pacific, while the remaining continental territories of Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona continued their long struggle for statehood. The early decades of the new century would see the resolution of these long-standing territorial questions and the admission of the final continental states. Oklahoma's path to statehood was unique in American history, marked by the merger of two separate territories with distinct histories and populations. The Indian Territory was established in the 1830s as a homeland for Native American tribes relocated from the southeastern United States. The Oklahoma Territory was organized in 1890 from lands open to white settlement through a series of dramatic land runs. The Indian Territory was home to the five civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, who had established their own governments, schools, and economic systems. These tribes had developed sophisticated political institutions and had maintained a degree of autonomy that was unique among Native American communities in the United States. However, the discovery of oil in both territories during the 1890s created new pressures for political reorganization. The oil boom attracted thousands of new residents and created enormous wealth, but it also led to conflicts over land rights, taxation, and political representation. The complex legal status of the Indian Territory made it challenging to regulate the oil industry and collect taxes, creating pressure for a more conventional form of territorial organization. The Curtis Act of 1898 initiated the process of dissolving tribal governments in the Indian Territory and prepared the region for statehood. This legislation was controversial among Native Americans, who saw it as a violation of treaty rights and an attack on tribal sovereignty. However, the federal government argued that the changing economic and social conditions in the territory required a more unified form of government. The process of merging the two territories was complex and contentious, involving negotiations over boundaries, the division of assets and debts, and the protection of Native American rights. The Sequoia Convention of 1905, organized by leaders of the five civilized tribes, proposed the creation of a separate state from the Indian Territory, but Congress rejected this proposal. Instead, Congress passed the Oklahoma Enabling Act in 1906, which provided for the merger of the two territories into a single state. The Constitutional Convention that followed was one of the most diverse in American history, including representatives of Native American tribes, African Americans, white settlers, and various immigrant communities. Oklahoma was admitted to the Union on November 16, 1907, as the 46th state, with Oklahoma City as its capital. The state's constitution included progressive provisions related to labor rights, corporate regulation, and civil rights, though subsequent legislation and court decisions often undermined these provisions. The admission of Oklahoma marked the end of the Indian Territory as a separate political entity and represented a significant defeat for Native American sovereignty. However, the state's large Native American population continued to play an essential role in Oklahoma politics and culture, and many tribal institutions survived the transition to statehood. New Mexico's struggle for statehood was one of the longest in American history, spanning more than 60 years from the territory's organization in 1850 to its admission in 1912. The territory's large Hispanic population, its Catholic religious heritage, and its distinctive cultural traditions created concerns among some members of Congress about its fitness for statehood. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which concluded the Mexican-American War in 1848, guaranteed the rights of Mexican citizens residing in the ceded territory, including the right to maintain their language, religion, and cultural traditions. However, the influx of Anglo-American settlers during the territorial period had created tensions between different cultural groups and raised questions about the territory's ability to maintain American political institutions. Conflicts over land rights, language use, and political representation marked the territorial period in New Mexico. Many Hispanic residents lost their land through legal challenges and discriminatory laws, while the territorial government struggled to accommodate the linguistic and cultural diversity of the population. The question of statehood for New Mexico became entangled with broader national debates about race, ethnicity, and American identity. Some members of Congress argued that the territory's Hispanic population was not sufficiently American to warrant statehood, while others contended that such arguments violated the principles of equality and democracy. The territorial government's efforts to achieve statehood were hampered by political instability, economic underdevelopment, and ongoing conflicts between different cultural groups. The territory's remote location and sparse population also created challenges for economic development and political organization. However, the early 20th century brought new opportunities for New Mexico's statehood campaign. The progressive era's emphasis on democratic reform and social justice created a more favorable climate for the admission of territories with diverse populations. The territory's strategic location and natural resources also became more critical as the United States expanded its presence in the Southwest. New Mexico was finally admitted to the Union on January 6, 1912, as the 47th state, with Santa Fe as its capital. The state's constitution included provisions that protected the rights of Spanish-speaking residents and recognized the state's multicultural heritage, although these protections were often inadequate in practice. Arizona's path to statehood was similarly long and complex, involving decades of territorial status, conflicts over mining rights, and political battles between different regions and interest groups. Arizona Territory had been organized in 1863, but the territory's harsh climate, sparse population, and ongoing conflicts with Apache tribes had delayed statehood for nearly 50 years. The development of copper mining during the late 19th century provided the economic foundation for Arizona's growth, while the completion of railroad connections to the rest of the country facilitated population growth and economic development. However, the territory's economy remained heavily dependent on mining and agriculture, creating vulnerabilities that would persist after statehood. The question of Arizona's capital became a significant issue during the statehood process, with Phoenix, Tucson, and Prescott all competing for the honor. The rivalry between these cities reflected broader tensions between different regions and economic interests within the territory. Arizona's statehood was also delayed by congressional concerns about the territory's political stability and economic development. The territory's small population and economic dependence on extractive industries raised questions about its ability to support state government and maintain democratic institutions. However, the progressive era brought new support for Arizona's statehood campaign. The territory's constitution, adopted in 1910, included progressive provisions related to labor rights, women's suffrage, and corporate regulation that reflected the influence of reform movements in the Southwest. Arizona was admitted to the Union on February 14, 1912, as the 48th state, with Phoenix as its capital. The state's constitution was one of the most progressive in the nation, featuring provisions for the initiative, referendum, and recall that gave voters direct control over legislation and the election of officials. The admission of Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona completed the organization of the continental United States and marked the end of the traditional territorial system. These three states brought the total number of states to 48, a number that would remain unchanged for nearly half a century. The early 20th century also saw the United States acquire new territories as a result of the Spanish-American War and other international developments. Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and other territories raised new questions about American expansion and the extension of democratic institutions to diverse populations. However, these new territories were treated differently from the continental territories that had preceded them. The Supreme Court's decisions in the insular cases established the principle that the Constitution did not automatically apply to all American territories, creating a distinction between incorporated and unincorporated territories that would have lasting implications for American territorial policy. The completion of continental statehood in 1912 marked the end of an era in American development. The frontier experience that had shaped American character and institutions for more than a century was officially over, and the United States had become a fully organized continental nation. This completion would have profound implications for American identity and development in the 20th century. Chapter 4: The Long Wait. Alaska and Hawaii's journey to statehood. The admission of Arizona in 1912 completed the continental United States, but two territories remained outside the Union for nearly another half-century. Alaska and Hawaii, despite their strategic importance and loyal service to the nation, faced unique obstacles to statehood that reflected changing attitudes about race, geography, and American identity in the 20th century. Alaska's journey to statehood began with its purchase from Russia in 1867. This transaction was initially ridiculed as Seward's folly, but would prove to be one of the most valuable territorial acquisitions in American history. The vast territory, more than twice the size of Texas, was initially governed as a military district before being organized as a civil territory in 1884. The discovery of gold in the Klondike region during the 1890s brought the first significant wave of American settlers to Alaska. Subsequent gold discoveries in Nome and Fairbanks attracted thousands more prospectors and entrepreneurs. However, Alaska's remote location, harsh climate, and sparse population made territorial governance extremely challenging. The territorial period in Alaska was marked by economic boom and bust cycles, conflicts over natural resource development, and struggles to establish effective government institutions. The territory's economy was heavily dependent on the fishing, mining, and logging industries, which were subject to dramatic fluctuations in demand and environmental conditions. World War II transformed Alaska's strategic importance and accelerated its development. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the subsequent invasion of the Aleutian Islands demonstrated Alaska's vulnerability and its crucial role in American defense. The construction of the Alaska Highway, military bases, and defense installations brought thousands of military personnel and civilian workers to the territory. The war also demonstrated Alaska's potential for economic development and population growth. The territory's strategic location made it a crucial link between the United States and Asia, while its natural resources became increasingly important for national defense and economic development. However, Alaska's path to statehood was complicated by several factors that distinguished it from previous territories. The territory's enormous size and sparse population raised questions about its ability to support state government and maintain democratic institutions. With fewer than 130,000 residents in 1940, Alaska had a smaller population than many American cities. The territory's economic dependence on federal spending and natural resource extraction also created concerns about its fiscal viability as a state. Critics argued that Alaska would be unable to generate sufficient tax revenue to support the state government and would become a permanent drain on federal resources. Racial and cultural factors also contributed to opposition to Alaska statehood. The territory's large Native American population, which included Eskimos, Aleuts, and various Indian tribes, raised concerns among some members of Congress about the territory's ability to maintain American political and cultural institutions. However, Alaska's statehood movement gained momentum during the 1950s as the territory's population grew and its economy diversified. The development of military installations during the Cold War brought thousands of new residents, while the discovery of oil and other natural resources demonstrated the territory's economic potential. The statehood campaign was led by a coalition of territorial politicians, business leaders, and civic organizations who argued that Alaska had earned the right to statehood through its loyal service during World War II and its continued strategic importance during the Cold War. They contended that the territory's vast natural resources and strategic location made it a valuable addition to the Union. The campaign faced opposition from various sources, including fishing and mining interests that feared state taxation and regulation, as well as members of Congress who questioned Alaska's readiness for statehood. However, the territory's supporters gradually built a coalition that included both Democrats and Republicans who recognized Alaska's strategic importance and democratic potential. Hawaii's path to statehood was equally complex, involving questions of race, culture, and strategic importance that reflected changing American attitudes about diversity and inclusion. The Hawaiian Islands had been an independent kingdom until 1893, when American businesspeople and planters overthrew Queen Liliuokalani and established a republic that was subsequently annexed by the United States in 1898. The territorial period in Hawaii was marked by the dominance of a small group of white planters and businessmen who controlled the territory's economy and politics. The Big Five corporations, American factors, Castle Cook, Alexander Baldwin, C. Brewer Company, and Theo H. Davies Company, controlled the sugar and pineapple industries that formed the foundation of Hawaii's economy. However, Hawaii's population was remarkably diverse, including Native Hawaiians, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans, Portuguese Americans, and other ethnic groups. This diversity created a unique multicultural society that differed significantly from the mainland United States. The question of Hawaii's fitness for statehood was complicated by racial prejudice and concerns about the loyalty of the territory's Asian American population. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 intensified these concerns, as some Americans questioned whether Hawaii's diverse population could be trusted with full citizenship and political rights. However, the war also demonstrated the loyalty and patriotism of Hawaii's residents, including the Japanese Americans who served with distinction in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and other military units. The territory's strategic importance as a military base and its economic contributions to the war effort also strengthened the case for statehood. The post-war period brought significant changes to Hawaii's political and social structure. The growth of labor unions, the expansion of democratic participation, and the emergence of new political leaders challenged the dominance of the Big Five, creating pressure for political reform. The statehood movement in Hawaii was led by a diverse coalition that included Native Hawaiians, Asian Americans, and white residents who believed that the territory had earned the right to full participation in American democracy. They argued that Hawaii's multicultural society demonstrated the possibility of racial harmony and democratic inclusion. However, the movement also faced opposition from various sources, including some Native Hawaiians who preferred independence to statehood, as well as mainland Americans who questioned whether a territory with a non-white majority should be admitted to the Union. The campaigns for Alaska and Hawaii statehood became intertwined during the 1950s, as supporters of both territories recognized that their chances for admission would be improved if they worked together. The two territories faced similar challenges, including their remote locations, diverse populations, and strategic importance. The political dynamics of statehood also played a crucial role in the admission process. Democrats generally supported statehood for both territories, believing that they would elect Democratic senators and representatives. Republicans were more divided, with some supporting statehood on principle while others opposed it for partisan reasons. The breakthrough came in 1958, when Congress passed the Alaska Statehood Act, followed by the Hawaii Statehood Act in 1959. The admission of these two territories as the 49th and 50th states completed the American Union and marked the end of the territorial system that had governed American expansion for more than a century. Alaska was admitted to the Union on January 3, 1959, followed by Hawaii on August 21, 1959. The admission of these two states required the redesign of the American flag to include 50 stars, a symbol that would represent the completed American Union for generations to come. The admission of Alaska and Hawaii represented more than just the addition of two new states to the Union. It marked a fundamental shift in American attitudes about race, culture, and national identity. The acceptance of Hawaii, with its non-white majority and multicultural society, demonstrated that American democracy could accommodate diversity and inclusion in ways that had not been possible in earlier periods. Similarly, Alaska's admission showed that American federalism could adapt to the challenges of governing vast and sparsely populated territories. The state's unique geography and climate necessitated new approaches to government and economic development, which would influence American policy for decades to come. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked the end of an era in American development. The territorial system that had governed American expansion since the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 had finally achieved its ultimate goal, the creation of a continental nation that extended American democratic institutions from sea to shining sea and beyond. Chapter 5. the transformation of American federalism. The admission of the final states between 1889 and 1959 did more than complete the American Union. It fundamentally transformed the nature of American federalism, creating new challenges and opportunities for democratic governance. The 26 states that joined during this period brought unprecedented diversity in geography, population, economy, and culture that tested the flexibility and adaptability of American political institutions. The completion of continental expansion created a truly national economy for the first time in American history. The admission of states rich in natural resources, from the copper mines of Montana to the oil fields of Oklahoma, from the forests of Washington to the agricultural lands of the Dakotas, provided the raw materials necessary for American industrial development and global economic leadership. However, this economic integration also created new forms of interdependence and vulnerability. The boom and bust cycles that characterized extractive industries in the western states had national implications. In contrast, the concentration of specific industries in particular regions created economic imbalances that persisted for generations. The Federal Reserve System, established in 1913, was partly a response to these challenges of managing a continental economy. The system's regional structure reflected the need to accommodate the diverse economic conditions and interests of different parts of the country. At the same time, its centralized authority provided the coordination necessary for national economic stability. The admission of states with diverse populations also challenged traditional assumptions about American identity and citizenship. The large Hispanic population of New Mexico, the multicultural society of Hawaii, and the Native American communities of Oklahoma all required new approaches to governance and representation that expanded the definition of American democracy. The Progressive Era reforms that emerged during this period were partly a response to these challenges of governing a diverse continental nation. The direct election of senators, women's suffrage, and other democratic reforms reflected the influence of Western states, which had served as laboratories for political innovation. Many of the new states had adopted progressive constitutions that included provisions for the initiative, referendum, and recall, giving voters direct control over legislation and elected officials. These innovations influenced national political development and contributed to the expansion of democratic participation throughout the country. The admission of states with small populations also created new challenges for representative government. The equal representation of states in the Senate meant that sparsely populated western states had the same voting power as heavily populated eastern states, creating tensions between different concepts of democratic representation. This issue became particularly acute as the population differences between states grew larger over time. By 1959, Alaska had fewer than 250,000 residents, while California had more than 15 million, yet, both states had equal representation in the Senate. This disparity raised questions about the fairness and effectiveness of the federal system that continue to influence American politics today. The geographic diversity of the new states also created challenges for national governance and policymaking. The vast distances, varied climates, and different economic conditions of states like Alaska and Hawaii required new approaches to federal administration and service delivery. The development of air transportation during the 20th century was crucial for integrating these remote states into the national economy and political system. The ability to travel quickly between distant parts of the country made it possible to maintain effective federal governance and national unity despite the enormous geographic scale of the United States. The Cold War period brought new significance to the strategic location of states like Alaska and Hawaii, which served as crucial outposts for American defense and power projection in the Pacific. The military installations and defense spending in these states demonstrated the continued importance of geography in national security and economic development. However, the completion of continental expansion also marked the end of the frontier experience that had shaped American character and institutions for more than a century. The Census Bureau's declaration in 1890 that the frontier was officially closed had profound implications for American identity and development. The end of the frontier meant that Americans could no longer look to westward expansion as a solution to social and economic problems. Instead, the nation had to develop new approaches to managing diversity, promoting economic development, and maintaining democratic institutions in a complete continental nation. The conservation movement that emerged during the Progressive Era was partly a response to the recognition that natural resources were finite and required careful management. The establishment of national parks, forests, and wildlife refuges reflected a new understanding of the relationship between human development and environmental protection. The New Deal programs of the 1930s represented another response to the challenges of governing a continental nation. The federal government's expanded role in economic regulation, social welfare, and regional development reflected the recognition that national problems required national solutions. The Tennessee Valley Authority, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and other New Deal programs demonstrated the federal government's capacity to coordinate development across multiple states and regions. These programs established precedents for federal involvement in regional planning and economic development that would influence American policy for generations. World War II further accelerated the transformation of American federalism by demonstrating the need for national coordination and planning. The war effort required unprecedented cooperation between federal, state, and local governments, while the mobilization of resources from across the continent showed the strategic advantages of continental unity. The post-war period brought new challenges and opportunities for American federalism. The Cold War necessitated ongoing federal leadership in defense and foreign policy, while the civil rights movement prompted state governments to uphold national ideals of equality and justice. The admission of Alaska and Hawaii in 1959 represented the culmination of this transformation of American federalism. These two states, with their unique geographic locations and diverse populations, demonstrated the ultimate flexibility and adaptability of American democratic institutions. The completion of the 50-state union also created new opportunities for American leadership on the global stage. The United States had become a truly continental nation with vast natural resources, diverse populations, and democratic institutions that spanned from the Arctic to the tropics. This achievement provided the foundation for American global leadership in the second half of the 20th century. However, the completion of continental expansion also created new responsibilities and challenges. The United States could no longer focus primarily on internal development and expansion but had to assume leadership roles in international affairs and global governance. The transformation of American federalism during this period established patterns and institutions that continue to influence American government today. The balance between federal and state authority, the representation of diverse populations and interests, and the management of a continental economy all remain central challenges for American democracy. The 26 states that joined the Union between 1889 and 1959 played crucial roles in this transformation, bringing new perspectives, resources, and challenges that enriched American democracy while also testing its limits. Their admission demonstrated the remarkable capacity of American institutions to adapt and evolve while maintaining their essential character and purpose. Conclusion: the completed Union and its legacy. As we conclude our examination of the modern era of American statehood, from 1889 to 1959, we must reflect on the remarkable achievement that the admission of these final 26 states represents. The completion of the 50-state union was not merely a matter of adding territory to the United States. It was the fulfillment of a democratic experiment that had begun with the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and had tested the limits of federal governance, democratic inclusion, and national unity for more than a century and a half. The states that joined the Union during this period: North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska, and Hawaii. Each brought unique contributions to the American nation while also presenting distinct challenges that tested the flexibility and adaptability of American institutions. The Great Admission of 1889 to 1890 demonstrated the systematic nature of American territorial development that had been achieved by the late 19th century. The simultaneous admission of 4 states showed that the United States had developed effective mechanisms for territorial governance and state creation that could accommodate rapid expansion while maintaining democratic standards and federal oversight. The struggles of Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah for statehood revealed the ongoing tensions between local autonomy and national standards that have always characterized American federalism. Wyoming's pioneering role in women's suffrage, Utah's resolution of the polygamy question, and Idaho's labor conflicts all demonstrated how Western territories served as laboratories for democratic innovation and social experimentation. The 20th century admissions of Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona marked the completion of continental expansion and the resolution of long-standing questions about cultural diversity and democratic inclusion. Oklahoma's unique history, resulting from the merger of Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory, created a state with unprecedented ethnic and cultural diversity. Meanwhile, New Mexico and Arizona's large Hispanic populations challenged traditional assumptions about American identity and citizenship. The final admissions of Alaska and Hawaii in 1959 represented perhaps the most significant test of American democratic flexibility and inclusion. These 2 territories, with their remote locations, diverse populations, and unique strategic importance, required new approaches to federal governance and democratic representation that expanded the definition of American citizenship and national identity. Alaska's admission demonstrated that American federalism could accommodate the challenges of governing vast and sparsely populated territories with unique geographic and climatic conditions. The state's enormous size, harsh climate, and dependence on natural resource extraction necessitated innovative approaches to government and economic development, which influenced American policy for decades to come. Hawaii's admission was equally significant, as it marked the first time that a territory with a non-white majority had been admitted to the Union. The state's multicultural society, with its blend of Native Hawaiian, Asian American, and other ethnic communities, demonstrated that American democracy could embrace diversity and inclusion in ways that had not been possible in earlier periods. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked the end of the territorial system that had governed American expansion since the nation's founding. The Northwest Ordinance's vision of an expanding federation of equal states had finally been realized, creating a continental nation that extended American democratic institutions from the Arctic to the tropics. However, this achievement came with significant costs and contradictions that continue to influence American society today. The displacement of Native Americans, the environmental consequences of rapid development, and the economic inequalities created by resource extraction all represent ongoing challenges that stem from the expansion era. The modern era of statehood also revealed the limitations of American democracy and the persistence of racial and ethnic prejudice. The long delays in admitting territories with diverse populations, the discrimination faced by minority communities, and the resistance to extending full citizenship rights to all Americans demonstrated that the promise of American democracy remained unfulfilled for many citizens. Nevertheless, the completion of the 50-state union represented a remarkable achievement in human organization and democratic governance. The United States had successfully extended democratic institutions across a continent, created a national economy that spanned thousands of miles, and maintained political unity despite enormous diversity in geography, population, and culture. The federal system that emerged from this process of expansion and state creation has proven remarkably durable and adaptable. The balance between federal and state authority, the representation of diverse interests and populations, and the management of a continental economy have all evolved while maintaining their essential character and purpose. The 26 states that joined the Union during the modern era continue to play crucial roles in American politics, economics, and culture. From the agricultural production of the Great Plains states to the technology industries of the Pacific Coast, from the energy resources of Alaska to the strategic location of Hawaii, these states provide essential contributions to American prosperity and security. The political influence of these states has also been significant, with their representatives playing key roles in national policymaking and their electoral votes helping to determine presidential elections. The equal representation of states in the Senate has given smaller Western states disproportionate influence in national politics. At the same time, their diverse populations have contributed to the ongoing evolution of American political coalitions. The cultural contributions of these states have been equally important, enriching American society with diverse traditions, perspectives, and experiences. The cowboy culture of the Great Plains, the environmental consciousness of the Pacific Northwest, the multicultural heritage of the Southwest, and the indigenous traditions of Alaska and Hawaii have all become part of the broader American identity. However, the completion of the 50-state union also created new challenges and responsibilities for American democracy. The end of territorial expansion meant that Americans could no longer look to westward movement as a solution to social and economic problems. Instead, the nation had to develop new approaches to managing diversity, promoting economic development, and maintaining democratic institutions in a complete continental nation. The environmental consequences of rapid expansion and development also became more apparent as the frontier closed and natural resources became scarcer. The conservation movement, environmental protection laws, and sustainable development policies all represent responses to the recognition that the nation's natural heritage requires careful stewardship for future generations. The global responsibilities that came with continental completion also transformed American foreign policy and international relations. The United States emerged from the expansion era as a continental power with the resources and strategic position necessary to play a leading role in world affairs. The two world wars, the Cold War, and America's ongoing global leadership all reflect the international implications of continental expansion and state creation. As we look back on the modern era of American statehood, we are reminded that the completion of the 50-state union was not an inevitable outcome, but rather the result of countless individual choices, political compromises, and historical circumstances that could have unfolded differently. The success of this democratic experiment required the vision of political leaders, the sacrifices of ordinary citizens, and the flexibility of American institutions in adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The legacy of this period continues to influence American life today, from the federal system that governs the relationship between national and state authority to the ongoing struggles for equality and inclusion that reflect the diverse heritage of the American people. Understanding this history is crucial for appreciating the achievements and limitations of American democracy, as well as for addressing the challenges that the nation faces in the 21st century. The story of how America's final states joined the Union is ultimately a tale about the possibilities and limitations of democratic governance, the costs and benefits of rapid change, and the ongoing effort to create a more perfect union. It reminds us that American democracy is not a finished product but an ongoing experiment that requires the active participation of every generation to fulfill its promise for all citizens. The 50 states that make up the United States of America today represent the culmination of more than 2 centuries of expansion, experimentation, and democratic development. Each state brings its history, culture, and contributions to the larger American story, while together they form a federal system that has proven capable of governing a continental nation while maintaining democratic institutions and individual liberty. As Americans continue to work toward a more perfect union in the 21st century, the lessons of the modern era of statehood provide both inspiration and guidance. The period showed that American democracy is capable of remarkable adaptation and growth, but it also demonstrated the importance of addressing fundamental questions of equality, inclusion, and environmental stewardship. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not the end of American development, but the beginning of a new phase in which the nation would have to address the challenges and opportunities of governing a fully developed continental democracy. The success of this ongoing experiment will depend on the ability of future generations to learn from the past while adapting American institutions to meet new challenges and fulfill the promise of democracy for all Americans. The economic revolution of the modern era. The admission of the final American states between 1889 and 1959 coincided with and contributed to a fundamental transformation of the American economy that would establish the United States as the world's leading industrial and economic power. The natural resources, strategic locations, and diverse populations of these new states provided the foundation for unprecedented economic growth and technological innovation that would reshape not only America but the entire global economy. The western states that joined the Union during this period brought vast mineral wealth that fueled American industrial development. Montana's copper mines supplied the raw materials for the electrical revolution that transformed American cities and industries. The Anaconda Copper Mining Company, based in Butte, Montana, became one of the world's most significant mining operations and a symbol of American industrial might. The development of copper mining in Montana required massive capital investment and technological innovation. The Berkeley Pit, which began operations in 1955, was one of the world's largest open-pit copper mines, demonstrating the scale of industrial development that characterized this period. However, the environmental costs of such massive mining operations would not become fully apparent until decades later. The Dakotas emerged as major agricultural producers, with North Dakota becoming a leading wheat producer and South Dakota developing both agriculture and mining industries. The development of mechanized farming techniques and the expansion of railroad networks enabled the cultivation of vast areas of previously unsuitable prairie land for agriculture. The introduction of new wheat varieties, improved farming equipment, and scientific agricultural methods transformed the Great Plains into one of the world's most productive agricultural regions. The development of grain elevators, flour mills, and other agricultural processing facilities led to the creation of new industries and employment opportunities throughout the region. However, the agricultural development of the Great Plains also created vulnerabilities that would become apparent during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. The intensive cultivation of marginal lands, combined with drought and poor farming practices, resulted in massive soil erosion and environmental degradation, forcing thousands of farmers to abandon their land. Washington state's forests provided the lumber necessary for the rapid urban development that characterized the early 20th century. The Pacific Northwest became a major center of lumber production, with companies like Weyerhaeuser building vast timber empires that supplied construction materials for cities across the country. The development of the lumber industry required significant technological innovation, including the invention of new logging equipment, sawmill machinery, and transportation systems. The construction of logging railroads and the development of new techniques for harvesting and processing timber enabled the exploitation of forest resources on an unprecedented scale. However, the intensive logging of old-growth forests also created environmental problems that would require decades to address. The clear-cutting of vast forest areas led to soil erosion, habitat destruction, and the loss of biodiversity that would influence environmental policy for generations to come. Idaho's mining industry, particularly silver mining in the Coeur d'Alene region, contributed to the nation's monetary system and industrial development. The discovery of rich silver deposits in the 1880s attracted thousands of miners, prompting the development of sophisticated mining techniques and equipment. The labor conflicts that characterized Idaho's mining industry during the 1890s reflected broader tensions between workers and employers that were emerging throughout American industry. The Western Federation of Miners, organized in part in response to conditions in Idaho's mines, became one of the most militant labor organizations in American history. Wyoming's cattle industry, as well as its later oil and gas production, contributed to American energy independence and economic development. The state's vast grasslands supported large-scale cattle ranching operations that supplied beef to growing urban markets. At the same time, the discovery of oil and natural gas provided a vital energy resource for industrial development. The development of Wyoming's energy resources required significant technological innovation and capital investment. The construction of pipelines, refineries, and other infrastructure created new industries and employment opportunities while also establishing Wyoming as a central energy-producing state. Utah's mining industry, particularly copper and silver mining, contributed to American industrial development while also demonstrating the economic potential of the Intermountain West. The development of the Bingham Canyon Mine, which became one of the world's largest open-pit copper mines, demonstrated the scale of industrial development that was possible in the western United States. The resolution of the Mormon question in Utah also opened the territory to increased economic development and integration with the national economy. The construction of railroad connections and the development of new industries diversified Utah's economy, reducing its dependence on agriculture. Oklahoma's oil industry, which developed rapidly after the state's admission to statehood in 1907, transformed the state into one of the nation's leading energy producers. The discovery of significant oil fields in the early 20th century attracted thousands of workers and investors, creating enormous wealth that profoundly influenced Oklahoma's development for generations. The oil boom in Oklahoma demonstrated both the opportunities and the challenges of resource-based economic development. While oil production created significant wealth and employment opportunities, it also led to boom and bust cycles that created economic instability and environmental problems. New Mexico and Arizona's mining industries, particularly copper mining, contributed to American industrial development while also demonstrating the economic potential of the Southwest. The development of large-scale mining operations necessitated significant technological innovation and substantial capital investment, thereby creating new industries and generating employment opportunities. The completion of railroad connections to these southwestern states facilitated their integration into the national economy, enabling the exploitation of their natural resources on a large scale. The construction of the Santa Fe Railway and other transportation networks opened these regions to increased settlement and economic development. Alaska's natural resources, including gold, oil, and fish, contributed to American economic development while also demonstrating the economic potential of the nation's most remote territory. The Klondike Gold Rush of the 1890s brought the first significant wave of American settlers to Alaska, establishing the territory's reputation as a land of opportunity and adventure. The development of Alaska's fishing industry, particularly salmon fishing, created one of the territory's most important economic sectors. The construction of canneries and the development of new fishing techniques enabled the commercial exploitation of Alaska's marine resources. However, Alaska's economic development was hampered by its remote location, harsh climate, and sparse population. The territory's economy remained heavily dependent on natural resource extraction and federal spending, creating vulnerabilities that would persist after statehood. Hawaii's agricultural development, particularly sugar and pineapple production, contributed to American economic growth while also demonstrating the economic potential of Pacific territories. The development of large-scale plantation agriculture required significant capital investment and technological innovation that transformed Hawaii's economy and society. The Big Five corporations that dominated Hawaii's economy during the territorial period demonstrated the concentration of economic power that characterized many Western states during this period. These companies controlled not only agricultural production but also transportation, banking, and other key economic sectors. However, Hawaii's strategic location in the Pacific also made it an important center for trade and military activities. The development of Pearl Harbor as a significant naval base underscored the territory's strategic importance and contributed significantly to its economic growth. The economic development of these western states also contributed to the growth of American cities and the expansion of national markets. The raw materials produced in the West supplied the factories of the East and Midwest, while the growing populations of western cities created new markets for manufactured goods. The development of transcontinental transportation networks, including railroads, highways, and eventually air transportation, facilitated the integration of western states into the national economy. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 marked the beginning of this process, but the expansion of transportation networks continued throughout Western state admission. The Panama Canal, completed in 1914, also contributed to the economic integration of Western states by providing a more efficient route for trade between the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. The canal reduced transportation costs and facilitated the development of trade relationships between Western states and international markets. The two world wars had a profound impact on the economic development of Western states, as military spending and defense production led to the creation of new industries and employment opportunities. The development of aircraft manufacturing in Washington and California, shipbuilding on the Pacific coast, and military installations throughout the West demonstrated the strategic importance of these regions. The Cold War continued this pattern of federal investment in Western states, as the development of nuclear weapons, aerospace technology, and other defense-related industries created new centers of economic activity. The establishment of national laboratories, military bases, and defense contractors throughout the West contributed to the region's continued economic growth. However, the economic development of Western states also created new forms of inequality and environmental degradation that would require ongoing attention and remediation. The boom and bust cycles that characterized extractive industries created economic instability. In contrast, the environmental costs of mining, logging, and other industrial activities created long-term problems that would influence policy for generations to come. The labor movements that emerged in Western states during this period also contributed to broader changes in American labor relations and social policy. The Western Federation of Miners, the Industrial Workers of the World, and other labor organizations that developed in the West influenced national labor policy. It contributed to the expansion of workers' rights. The economic transformation of the modern era established patterns and institutions that continue to influence American economic development today. The emphasis on natural resource extraction, technological innovation, and federal investment that characterized Western development became characteristic features of the American economy. However, the modern era has also demonstrated the importance of economic diversification and sustainable development practices. The states that successfully diversified their economies and developed sustainable approaches to resource use were better able to maintain long-term prosperity and stability. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked the culmination of this economic transformation, establishing the United States as the world's leading economic power. The natural resources, strategic locations, and diverse populations of all 50 states provided the foundation for continued economic growth and global leadership. The social and cultural transformation, the admission of the final American states between 1889 and 1959 brought unprecedented social and cultural diversity to the United States, challenging traditional assumptions about American identity and creating new opportunities for cultural exchange and innovation. The populations of these new states included Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and immigrants from around the world, creating a multicultural society that would influence American culture for generations to come. The Great Plains states that were admitted in 1889 to 1890 brought large populations of European immigrants who had been attracted by the promise of free land and economic opportunity had attracted. German, Scandinavian, and Eastern European immigrants established farming communities throughout North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and other Western states, bringing their languages, religions, and cultural traditions with them. These immigrant communities created distinctive cultural landscapes that combined traditional Old World elements with the opportunities of the New World. The construction of churches, schools, and cultural institutions reflected the determination of immigrant communities to maintain their heritage while also adapting to American conditions. However, the process of cultural adaptation was often difficult and sometimes painful. Immigrant children faced pressure to abandon their native languages and adopt American customs, while their parents struggled to maintain traditional ways of life in a rapidly changing environment. The development of public education systems in Western states played a crucial role in the process of cultural assimilation and the formation of American identity. The establishment of schools, libraries, and universities helped to create shared cultural experiences and common values that transcended ethnic and religious differences. The land-grant colleges established through the Morrill Act were significant in Western states, as they provided practical education and scientific research that supported agricultural and industrial development. These institutions also served as centers of cultural and intellectual life, helping to integrate diverse communities into American society. The Native American populations of Western states faced particular challenges during this period, as federal policies aimed at assimilation and the dissolution of tribal governments threatened traditional ways of life. The Dawes Act of 1887, which divided tribal lands into individual allotments, was designed to encourage Native Americans to adopt white farming practices and abandon tribal identities. However, many Native American communities resisted these assimilation efforts and worked to maintain their cultural traditions and tribal identities. The development of pan-Indian movements and the emergence of Native American political organizations reflected the determination of indigenous peoples to survive and adapt to changing circumstances. The Indian Territory, which became part of Oklahoma in 1907, was home to dozens of Native American tribes that had been relocated from other parts of the country. The merger of Indian Territory with Oklahoma Territory created a state with one of the largest Native American populations in the nation. It required new approaches to managing cultural diversity and protecting the rights of minorities. The Hispanic populations of New Mexico and Arizona faced similar challenges in maintaining their cultural identities while adapting to American political and economic systems. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo had guaranteed the rights of Mexican citizens living in the ceded territory. However, these guarantees were often disregarded in practice. The territorial period in New Mexico and Arizona was marked by conflicts over language rights, land ownership, and political representation. Many Hispanic residents lost their land through legal challenges and discriminatory laws, while territorial governments struggled to accommodate linguistic and cultural diversity. However, Hispanic communities also demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability in maintaining their cultural traditions while participating in American political and economic life. The development of Hispanic newspapers, cultural organizations, and political movements reflected the determination of these communities to preserve their heritage while also claiming their rights as American citizens. The admission of New Mexico in 1912 was particularly significant because it marked the first time that a state with a large Spanish-speaking population had been admitted to the Union. The state's constitution included provisions protecting the rights of Spanish-speaking residents, though these protections were often inadequate in practice. The Asian American populations of Western states, particularly in California, Washington, and Hawaii, also faced significant challenges related to discrimination and exclusion. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and subsequent legislation restricted Asian immigration and denied citizenship rights to Asian residents. However, Asian American communities also made significant contributions to Western development, particularly in agriculture, railroad construction, and small business development. The success of Asian American farmers, merchants, and entrepreneurs demonstrated their economic importance and challenged stereotypes about their capabilities and loyalty. The Japanese American community in Hawaii was particularly significant because of its size and economic importance. Japanese immigrants and their descendants played a crucial role in Hawaii's agricultural development, becoming an integral part of the territory's multicultural society. However, the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 led to increased suspicion and discrimination against Japanese Americans throughout the country. The internment of Japanese Americans during World War II represented one of the most serious violations of civil rights in American history. It demonstrated the persistence of racial prejudice even in supposedly progressive Western states. The multicultural society that developed in Hawaii during the territorial period was unique in American history. The territory's population included Native Hawaiians, Asian Americans, European Americans, and other ethnic groups that had learned to coexist and cooperate in ways that were rare in other parts of the United States. This multicultural experience in Hawaii influenced American attitudes about race and ethnicity and contributed to the civil rights movements of the mid-20th century. The successful integration of diverse populations in Hawaii demonstrated that racial harmony was possible and provided a model for other parts of the country. The admission of Hawaii as the 50th state in 1959 was particularly significant because it marked the first time that a state with a non-white majority had been admitted to the Union. This admission represented a significant shift in American attitudes toward race and citizenship, demonstrating the evolution of American democracy toward greater inclusion and equality. The cultural contributions of Western states extended beyond their diverse populations to encompass distinctive forms of art, literature, and popular culture that had a broader influence on American culture. The cowboy culture of the Great Plains, the environmental consciousness of the Pacific Northwest, and the multicultural heritage of the Southwest all became part of the broader American identity. Western literature, including the works of authors such as Willa Cather, John Steinbeck, and Wallace Stegner, has captured the unique experiences and landscapes of the Western states and contributed significantly to American literary development. These writers explored themes of frontier life, environmental change, and cultural conflict that reflected the distinctive characteristics of Western society. The development of Hollywood and the film industry in California also had profound effects on American popular culture and global perceptions of American society. The Western film genre, in particular, created enduring myths and stereotypes about the American West that influenced popular culture for generations. However, these cultural representations often ignored or misrepresented the experiences of minority communities and the environmental costs of Western development. The romanticization of frontier life and the glorification of conquest and exploitation created cultural narratives that obscured the complex realities of Western history. The environmental movement that emerged during the 20th century was partly a response to the recognition that Western development had created significant environmental problems that required new approaches to conservation and resource management. The establishment of national parks, wilderness areas, and environmental protection laws reflected growing awareness of the need to balance economic development with environmental protection. The social and cultural transformation of the modern era established patterns and institutions that continue to influence American society today. The multiculturalism, environmental consciousness, and democratic innovation that characterized Western states became characteristic features of American culture more broadly. However, the modern era has also revealed the persistence of discrimination, inequality, and cultural conflict, which require ongoing efforts to address. The struggles of minority communities for equal rights and recognition, the environmental costs of rapid development, and the challenges of managing cultural diversity remain significant issues in contemporary American society. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not the end of social and cultural change but the beginning of a new phase in which Americans would have to address the challenges and opportunities of governing a genuinely diverse and multicultural nation. The success of this ongoing experiment depends on Americans' ability to learn from the experiences of Western states and develop new approaches to promoting equality, protecting the environment, and managing cultural diversity. The political innovation of the Western states that joined the Union between 1889 and 1959 served as laboratories for democratic innovation and political experimentation that would influence American political development for generations to come. These states pioneered new forms of democratic participation, expanded voting rights, and developed innovative approaches to governance that challenged traditional assumptions about American democracy. Wyoming's adoption of women's suffrage in 1869, while still a territory, made it the first jurisdiction in the United States to grant women the right to vote. This pioneering action was motivated partly by the practical need to attract female settlers to the territory and partly by a genuine belief in gender equality among territorial leaders. The women's suffrage experiment in Wyoming was closely watched by observers throughout the country, who were curious to see whether women's political participation would have positive or negative effects on democratic governance. The success of women's suffrage in Wyoming helped to build support for the national women's suffrage movement and demonstrated that women could participate effectively in political life. When Wyoming applied for statehood in 1890, some members of Congress opposed admission due to the territory's provision for women's suffrage. However, Wyoming's territorial representatives made it clear that they would rather remain a territory than give up women's suffrage, and Congress ultimately accepted Wyoming with its progressive voting laws intact. The admission of Wyoming as the equality state marked a significant milestone in the women's rights movement and set a precedent for other Western states to expand voting rights. Colorado, Utah, and Idaho all granted women's suffrage during the 1890s, creating a bloc of Western states that led the nation in democratic innovation. The leadership of the Western states in women's suffrage reflected broader patterns of democratic experimentation that characterized the region during this period. The frontier environment encouraged political participation and social mobility, while the absence of established elites created opportunities for new forms of democratic organization. Many Western states adopted constitutional provisions for the initiative, referendum, and recall, which gave voters direct control over legislation and elected officials. These innovations, which were pioneered in South Dakota and other Western states during the 1890s, represented a significant expansion of democratic participation and challenged traditional forms of representative government. The initiative process allowed citizens to propose new laws or constitutional amendments through petition drives. In contrast, the referendum process enabled voters to approve or reject legislation passed by the state legislature. The recall process allowed voters to remove elected officials from office before the end of their terms. These direct democracy innovations were partly a response to concerns about the influence of corporate interests and political machines in state and local government. Western states, with their economies heavily dependent on mining, railroad, and agricultural interests, were particularly susceptible to corporate influence and political corruption. The populist movement of the 1890s had strong support in Western agricultural states, where farmers faced economic hardship and felt that traditional political parties did not represent their interests. The Populist Party's platform included demands for monetary reform, railroad regulation, and direct democracy that influenced political development throughout the West. The Progressive-era reforms that emerged during the early 20th century were heavily influenced by innovations that had been pioneered in Western states. The direct election of senators, mandated by the 17th Amendment in 1913, had been advocated by Western states that felt their interests were not adequately represented in the Senate. Many Western states also pioneered reforms in labor relations, environmental protection, and social welfare that would later be adopted at the national level. The 8-hour workday, workers' compensation, and other labor protections were first implemented in Western states before being adopted more broadly. The environmental conservation movement also had strong roots in Western states, where the effects of mining, logging, and agricultural development were most visible. The establishment of national parks, beginning with Yellowstone in 1872, reflected growing awareness of the need to protect natural resources and scenic landscapes. However, Western political innovation was not always progressive or inclusive. Many Western states also pioneered discriminatory legislation that restricted the rights of minority groups and limited democratic participation. The Chinese Exclusion Act, anti-miscegenation laws, and other discriminatory measures often had their origins in Western states. Their unique economic and social conditions also influenced the political development of Western states. The boom and bust cycles that characterized extractive industries created political instability and encouraged the development of radical political movements that challenged established institutions. The Western Federation of Miners, the Industrial Workers of the World, and other radical labor organizations that emerged in Western states advocated for fundamental changes in American economic and political systems. These organizations often used direct action and confrontational tactics that challenged traditional approaches to political change. The political violence that sometimes accompanied labor conflicts in Western states also influenced national debates about law and order, federal authority, and the rights of workers and employers. The Coeur d'Alene labor wars in Idaho, the Colorado labor wars, and other conflicts demonstrated the potential for political and economic tensions to escalate into violence. The admission of Oklahoma in 1907 presented unique challenges for democratic governance because of the state's diverse population and complex history. The merger of Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory created a state with large Native American, African American, and white populations that had different political traditions and interests. The Oklahoma Constitutional Convention was one of the most diverse in American history, comprising representatives from various ethnic and racial groups who had to negotiate complex questions regarding voting rights, representation, and government structure. The resulting constitution included progressive provisions related to labor rights and corporate regulation, though these were often undermined by subsequent legislation. The admission of New Mexico and Arizona in 1912 also presented challenges related to cultural diversity and democratic inclusion. Both territories had large Hispanic populations that spoke Spanish and maintained distinctive cultural traditions that differed from those of other American states. The question of language rights became a significant issue in both territories, as some members of Congress questioned whether states with large Spanish-speaking populations could maintain American political institutions. However, both territories ultimately adopted constitutions that protected the rights of Spanish-speaking residents while also establishing English as the primary language of government. The long delay in admitting New Mexico and Arizona reflected broader concerns about the compatibility of cultural diversity with American democracy. These concerns persisted throughout the 20th century and influenced debates about immigration, multiculturalism, and national identity. The admission of Alaska and Hawaii in 1959 presented the final test of American democratic flexibility and inclusion. Both territories had unique characteristics that challenged traditional assumptions about American statehood and democratic governance. Alaska's enormous size and sparse population raised questions about the feasibility of democratic governance across such vast distances. The state's economy was heavily dependent on natural resource extraction and federal spending, creating concerns about its long-term viability and independence. Hawaii's multicultural population and strategic location in the Pacific also created unique challenges for democratic governance. The territory's non-white majority and its distance from the continental United States raised questions about its integration into American political and cultural life. However, the successful admission of both Alaska and Hawaii demonstrated the ultimate flexibility and adaptability of American democratic institutions. Both states have maintained effective democratic governments while also preserving their distinctive characteristics and contributing to American political and cultural development. The political innovations pioneered by Western states during the modern era continue to influence American politics today. Direct democracy mechanisms, environmental protection laws, and expanded voting rights all have their origins in Western political experimentation during this period. However, the Western experience also revealed the limitations and contradictions of American democracy. The discrimination against minority groups, the influence of corporate interests, and the environmental costs of rapid development all demonstrate the ongoing challenges of democratic governance in a diverse and rapidly changing society. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked the culmination of more than a century of democratic experimentation and political innovation. The Western states had served as laboratories for testing new approaches to governance, representation, and citizen participation, enriching American democracy while also revealing its limitations and contradictions. The environmental legacy of Western statehood. The admission of the final American states between 1889 and 1959 coincided with an unprecedented environmental transformation that established patterns of resource use, conservation, and environmental protection that continue to influence American policy today. The vast natural resources of these Western states provided the foundation for American economic development, while also creating environmental challenges that required new approaches to conservation and resource management. The Great Plains states that were admitted in 1889 to 1890 experienced dramatic environmental changes as millions of acres of native prairie were converted to agricultural use. The introduction of European farming practices and the use of steel plows disrupted the prairie soils that had remained undisturbed for thousands of years, resulting in changes in vegetation patterns, wildlife populations, and water cycles. The development of wheat farming on the Great Plains required the destruction of native grassland ecosystems that had supported vast herds of buffalo and other wildlife. The near extinction of the buffalo, which was largely completed by the 1880s, represented one of the most dramatic examples of human impact on wildlife populations in American history. The intensive cultivation of marginal lands on the Great Plains also created vulnerabilities that would become apparent during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. The combination of drought, poor farming practices, and soil erosion resulted in massive dust storms, forcing thousands of farmers to abandon their land and migrate to other parts of the country. The Dust Bowl highlighted the environmental consequences of rapid agricultural development, prompting the development of new approaches to soil conservation and sustainable farming practices. The Soil Conservation Service, established in 1935, developed new techniques for preventing erosion and maintaining soil fertility that would influence agricultural practices for generations to come. The mining industries that developed in Montana, Idaho, and other western states had equally dramatic environmental impacts that are still visible today. The copper mines of Butte, Montana, created one of the largest environmental contamination sites in the United States, with toxic waste that continues to threaten groundwater and public health. The development of open-pit mining techniques, such as those used at the Berkeley Pit in Montana, involved moving enormous amounts of earth and rock while also generating toxic waste that required expensive cleanup efforts. The environmental costs of these mining operations were largely ignored during the period of active mining but have required billions of dollars in remediation efforts. The silver mines of Idaho's Coeur d'Alene region have also created significant environmental contamination, which has required ongoing cleanup efforts. The mining waste and toxic chemicals released into the environment have impacted water quality, wildlife populations, and human health throughout the region. However, the mining industry also contributed to the development of early environmental awareness and regulation. The conflicts between mining companies and downstream users over water pollution led to some of the first environmental lawsuits in American history, establishing precedents for environmental protection that would influence later legislation. The logging industry that developed in Washington, Idaho, and other western states with extensive forests had a profound impact on forest ecosystems and wildlife populations. The clear-cutting of old-growth forests destroyed habitats that had taken centuries to develop, leading to changes in water cycles, soil composition, and biodiversity. The Pacific Northwest's old-growth forests, which contained trees that were hundreds or even thousands of years old, represented irreplaceable ecological resources that were largely destroyed during the period of intensive logging in the early 20th century. The loss of these ancient forests represented a permanent reduction in biodiversity and ecological complexity. However, the logging industry also contributed to early conservation efforts and the development of scientific forestry practices. The establishment of national forests and the development of sustainable logging practices reflected growing awareness of the need to balance economic development with environmental protection. The development of irrigation systems in arid western states allowed agriculture to expand into areas that would otherwise have been unsuitable for farming. Still, it also led to significant environmental changes. The diversion of water from rivers and streams affected downstream ecosystems and wildlife populations, while the depletion of groundwater resources created long-term sustainability challenges. The construction of large dams and irrigation projects, such as those built by the Bureau of Reclamation, transformed entire river systems, creating new landscapes that differed dramatically from their natural conditions. These projects provided water for agriculture and urban development, but also destroyed riparian habitats and blocked fish migration routes. The environmental impacts of Western development were not limited to rural areas. The rapid growth of Western cities created air and water pollution problems that required new approaches to urban planning and environmental regulation. The development of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and other Western cities demonstrated both the opportunities and challenges of urban growth in arid and semi-arid environments. However, the Western experience also contributed to the development of environmental consciousness and conservation movements that would influence national policy. The establishment of national parks, beginning with Yellowstone in 1872, represented a new approach to land management that emphasized preservation over exploitation. The national park system that developed during this period was heavily concentrated in Western states, reflecting both the scenic beauty of Western landscapes and the federal ownership of large areas of Western land. Parks such as Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, and Glacier have become symbols of American natural heritage and have helped build support for environmental protection. The conservation movement that emerged during the Progressive Era was led by figures such as John Muir, Gifford Pinchot, and Theodore Roosevelt, who recognized the need to protect natural resources for future generations. The establishment of national forests, wildlife refuges, and other protected areas reflected growing awareness of environmental limits and the need for sustainable resource use. However, the conservation movement was also marked by conflicts between different approaches to environmental protection. The preservationists, led by John Muir, advocated for the protection of wilderness areas in their natural state. In contrast, the conservationists, led by Gifford Pinchot, supported the sustainable use of natural resources for economic development. These conflicts were exemplified by the controversy over the Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite National Park, which was dammed to provide water for San Francisco despite opposition from preservationists. The Hetch Hetchy controversy established essential precedents for environmental decision-making and demonstrated the ongoing tensions between development and preservation. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s marked a pivotal moment in American environmental consciousness, leading to innovative approaches to soil conservation and sustainable agriculture. The recognition that human activities could cause environmental disasters on a regional scale led to increased federal involvement in environmental protection and resource management. The New Deal programs of the 1930s included significant environmental components, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, which employed young men in reforestation and conservation projects nationwide. These programs demonstrated the potential for government action to address environmental problems while also providing employment and economic stimulus. World War II presented both new environmental challenges and opportunities, as military activities and defense production created both environmental damage and technological innovations that would influence post-war environmental policy. The development of nuclear weapons and nuclear power created new forms of environmental contamination that would require new approaches to environmental protection. The post-war period brought increased awareness of environmental problems and the development of new environmental movements that would influence policy for generations. The publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962 helped to launch the modern environmental movement and led to new approaches to environmental regulation and protection. The environmental legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American environmental policy today. The national parks, forests, and wilderness areas that were established during this period remain essential components of America's natural heritage, while the environmental problems created by mining, logging, and agricultural development continue to require ongoing attention and remediation. The Western experience also established essential precedents for federal involvement in environmental protection and resource management. The recognition that environmental problems often cross state boundaries and require coordinated action led to the development of federal environmental agencies and regulations, which continue to play a crucial role in environmental protection. However, the Western experience also revealed the ongoing tensions between economic development and environmental protection that continue to influence American policy today. The boom and bust cycles that characterized extractive industries, the environmental costs of rapid development, and the challenges of managing natural resources in arid environments all remain essential issues in contemporary environmental policy. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not the end of environmental challenges but the beginning of a new phase in which Americans would have to address the cumulative effects of more than a century of rapid development and resource extraction. The environmental legacy of Western statehood provides both lessons and warnings for contemporary efforts to achieve sustainable development and environmental protection. The international dimensions of Western statehood. The admission of the final American states between 1889 and 1959 took place within a complex international context that influenced both the process of statehood and the role of these states in American foreign policy. The strategic locations, natural resources, and diverse populations of these Western states made them significant factors in America's emergence as a global power, shaping the nation's relationships with other countries worldwide. The completion of continental expansion during this period coincided with America's emergence as an imperial power following the Spanish-American War of 1898. The acquisition of territories in the Caribbean and Pacific created new responsibilities for American foreign policy while also demonstrating the strategic importance of Western states as bases for power projection and defense. The Pacific Coast states of Washington and California, and later Hawaii, became crucial components of America's Pacific strategy, serving as bases for trade, military operations, and diplomatic activities throughout the Pacific region. The development of ports, naval facilities, and military installations in these states reflected their growing importance in American foreign policy. The completion of the Panama Canal in 1914 further enhanced the strategic importance of Pacific Coast states by providing a more efficient route for trade and military movement between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The canal reduced transportation costs and facilitated the development of trade relationships between Western states and international markets. The two world wars underscored the pivotal role of Western states in American defense and foreign policy. During World War I, Western states provided essential raw materials, agricultural products, and military personnel that supported the American war effort. The development of aircraft manufacturing in California and shipbuilding on the Pacific Coast established these states as centers of defense production. World War II had even more dramatic effects on Western states, as the Pacific theater of operations made the Western United States a crucial front in the global conflict. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 demonstrated the vulnerability of American Pacific territories while also highlighting their strategic importance. The development of military installations, defense industries, and research facilities throughout the West during World War II transformed the region's economy and society while also establishing it as a permanent center of American military power. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, was primarily based in Western states, including facilities in New Mexico, Washington, and California. The internment of Japanese Americans during World War II also demonstrated the international dimensions of domestic policy and how foreign conflicts could affect minority communities within the United States. The decision to intern Japanese Americans was influenced by fears about their loyalty and potential for espionage, though these fears were largely unfounded. The Cold War period continued to bring importance to Western states as centers of defense production, military installations, and strategic research. The development of nuclear weapons, aerospace technology, and other defense-related industries in Western states reflected their continued importance in American national security policy. The establishment of military bases, research laboratories, and defense contractors throughout the West created new forms of economic dependence on federal spending while also contributing to technological innovation and economic development. The aerospace industry in California, the nuclear facilities in New Mexico, and the military installations in Alaska all underscored the ongoing significance of the Western states in American defense policy. The admission of Alaska in 1959 was particularly significant from an international perspective, as it gave the United States a strategic foothold in the Arctic and enhanced American capabilities for monitoring Soviet activities during the Cold War. Alaska's location made it crucial for early warning systems, military communications, and strategic defense initiatives. The development of the Distant Early Warning (DEW) line and other defense systems in Alaska demonstrated the state's importance in American-Soviet relations and global strategic competition. The state's natural resources, particularly oil and minerals, also became essential factors in American energy security and economic independence. Hawaii's admission in 1959 was equally significant internationally, as it formalized American control over a strategic location in the Central Pacific that had been crucial for American military and economic activities since the late 19th century. Hawaii's location made it an essential base for American operations throughout the Pacific region. The multicultural population of Hawaii also had international implications, as the state's Asian American communities maintained cultural and economic connections with their countries of origin. These connections facilitated trade relationships and cultural exchanges, contributing to American engagement with the Asia-Pacific region. The natural resources of the western states also had significant international implications, as they provided raw materials essential for American industrial development and military capabilities. The copper mines of Montana and Arizona, the oil fields of Alaska and Oklahoma, and the agricultural products of the Great Plains all contributed to American economic independence and global competitiveness. However, the development of these natural resources also created international environmental problems that required cooperation with other countries. Air pollution from mining and industrial activities crossed national boundaries, while the depletion of shared water resources affected relationships with Mexico and Canada. The immigration patterns that characterized Western states during this period also had critical international dimensions. The Chinese Exclusion Act and other discriminatory immigration laws reflected American attitudes toward Asia and had significant effects on American-Asian relations. The discrimination against Asian immigrants in Western states created diplomatic tensions and influenced American foreign policy throughout the Pacific region. The Mexican-American populations of the southwestern states maintained cultural and economic connections with Mexico, which influenced American-Mexican relations. The treatment of Mexican Americans in the United States affected diplomatic relationships and created ongoing tensions over immigration, trade, and cultural issues. The Native American populations of Western states also had international dimensions, as many tribes maintained cultural and family connections that crossed national boundaries. Other countries often criticized the treatment of Native Americans in the United States, and this became a factor in American international relations and human rights policies. The environmental consequences of Western development also had international implications, as pollution and resource depletion affected shared ecosystems, creating transboundary environmental problems. The development of international environmental agreements and cooperation mechanisms was partly a response to these cross-border environmental challenges. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked the culmination of American continental expansion, establishing the United States as a truly transcontinental power with interests and capabilities that spanned from the Arctic to the tropics. This achievement provided the foundation for American global leadership during the second half of the 20th century. However, the completion of continental expansion also created new responsibilities and challenges for American foreign policy. The United States could no longer focus primarily on internal development and expansion but had to assume leadership roles in international affairs and global governance. The Western states that were admitted during this period continue to play essential roles in American foreign policy and international relations today. Their strategic locations, natural resources, and diverse populations make them crucial components of American global engagement and influence. The international dimensions of Western statehood thus represent an essential but often overlooked aspect of American expansion and development. Understanding these international connections and implications is essential for appreciating the full significance of Western statehood and its continuing influence on American foreign policy and global relations. Conclusion: the completed American experiment. As we conclude our examination of the modern era of American statehood, we must reflect on the extraordinary achievement that the completion of the 50-state union represents. The admission of the final 26 states between 1889 and 1959 marked not just the end of territorial expansion but the fulfillment of a democratic experiment that had begun with the founding of the Republic and had tested the limits of federal governance, democratic inclusion, and national unity for more than a century and a half. The journey from 24 states in 1889 to 50 states in 1959 tells the story of how America completed itself, how a nation that had already stretched from sea to shining sea finally filled in all the spaces in between and extended its democratic institutions to the most remote corners of the continent and beyond. It was not merely a process of adding territory but a fundamental transformation of American society, politics, and identity that established the United States as a truly continental and global power. The Great Admission of 1889 to 1890, which brought North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington into the Union, demonstrated the systematic and mature approach that American territorial development had achieved by the late 19th century. These 4 states, admitted within 8 months of each other, showed that the United States had developed effective mechanisms for territorial governance and state creation that could accommodate rapid expansion while maintaining democratic standards. The struggles of Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah for statehood in the 1890s revealed both the flexibility and the limitations of American democracy. Wyoming's pioneering role in women's suffrage demonstrated the capacity of Western territories to serve as laboratories for democratic innovation. At the same time, Utah's long battle over polygamy showed how cultural and religious differences could create obstacles to full inclusion in the American system. The 20th century admissions of Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona marked the completion of continental expansion and the resolution of long-standing questions about cultural diversity and democratic inclusion. Oklahoma's unique history, resulting from the merger of Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory, created a state with unprecedented ethnic and cultural diversity. Meanwhile, New Mexico and Arizona's large Hispanic populations challenged traditional assumptions about American identity and citizenship. The final admissions of Alaska and Hawaii in 1959 represented perhaps the most significant test of American democratic flexibility and inclusion. These 2 territories, separated by thousands of miles and representing vastly different geographic and cultural environments, required new approaches to federal governance and democratic representation that expanded the definition of American citizenship and national identity. Alaska's admission demonstrated that American federalism could accommodate the challenges of governing enormous and sparsely populated territories with unique geographic and climatic conditions. The state's vast natural resources and strategic location made it a valuable addition to the Union. At the same time, its harsh environment and sparse population required innovative approaches to government and economic development. Hawaii's admission was equally significant, as it marked the first time that a territory with a non-white majority had been admitted to the Union. The state's multicultural society, with its blend of Native Hawaiian, Asian American, and other ethnic communities, demonstrated that American democracy could embrace diversity and inclusion in ways that had not been possible in earlier periods. The economic transformation that accompanied the admission of these final states provided the foundation for America's emergence as the world's leading industrial and economic power. The natural resources of Western states, from Montana's copper to Oklahoma's oil, from Alaska's gold to Hawaii's strategic location, supplied the raw materials and strategic advantages necessary for global economic leadership. However, this economic development also came with significant environmental costs that continue to influence American policy today. The mining, logging, and agricultural development that characterized Western expansion created environmental problems that required new approaches to conservation and resource management. The establishment of national parks, forests, and environmental protection laws reflected growing awareness of the need to balance economic development with environmental stewardship. The social and cultural transformation brought by these diverse new states enriched American society while also creating new challenges for democratic governance. The immigrant communities of the Great Plains, the Native American populations of Oklahoma, the Hispanic communities of the Southwest, and the multicultural society of Hawaii all contributed to a more diverse and complex American identity. This diversity also tested the limits of American tolerance and inclusion. The discrimination faced by minority communities, the conflicts over language and cultural rights, and the resistance to extending full citizenship to all Americans demonstrated that the promise of American democracy remained unfulfilled for many citizens. The political innovations pioneered by Western states during this period continue to influence American democracy today. The expansion of voting rights, the development of direct democracy mechanisms, and the creation of new approaches to representation and governance all had their origins in Western political experimentation. However, the Western experience also revealed the ongoing tensions between different concepts of democracy and representation. The equal representation of states in the Senate gave sparsely populated Western states disproportionate political influence. At the same time, the concentration of economic power in extractive industries created new forms of inequality and political corruption. The international dimensions of Western statehood also played crucial roles in America's emergence as a global power. The strategic locations of Pacific Coast states, the natural resources of Western territories, and the diverse populations of new states all contributed to American capabilities for global engagement and leadership. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not just the end of territorial expansion but the beginning of a new phase in American development. The United States had become a truly continental nation, with the resources, diversity, and democratic institutions necessary for global leadership. However, it also faced new challenges and responsibilities that would test American institutions in new ways. The civil rights movement, the environmental movement, and other social and political changes of the 1960s and beyond were all influenced by the experiences and lessons of Western statehood. The struggles for equality and inclusion, the recognition of environmental limits, and the challenges of governing a diverse continental nation all had their roots in the Western experience. As we reflect on this remarkable period of American expansion and development, we are reminded that the completion of the 50-state union was not an inevitable outcome, but rather the result of countless individual choices, political compromises, and historical circumstances that could have unfolded differently. The success of this democratic experiment required the vision of political leaders, the sacrifices of ordinary citizens, and the flexibility of American institutions in adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The legacy of the modern era of statehood continues to influence American life today, from the federal system that governs the relationship between national and state authority to the ongoing struggles for equality and inclusion that reflect the diverse heritage of the American people. Understanding this history is crucial for appreciating the achievements and limitations of American democracy and for addressing the challenges that the nation faces in the 21st century. The story of how America's final states joined the Union is ultimately a tale about the possibilities and limitations of democratic governance, the costs and benefits of rapid change, and the ongoing effort to create a more perfect union. It reminds us that American democracy is not a finished product but an ongoing experiment that requires the active participation of every generation to fulfill its promise for all citizens. The 50 states that make up the United States of America today represent the culmination of more than 2 centuries of expansion, experimentation, and democratic development. Each state brings its history, culture, and contributions to the larger American story, while together they form a federal system that has proven capable of governing a continental nation while maintaining democratic institutions and individual liberty. The completion of this great democratic experiment in 1959 established the United States as a model for other nations seeking to balance unity and diversity, federal authority and local autonomy, economic development and environmental protection. However, it also created new challenges and responsibilities that continue to test American institutions and values. As Americans continue to work toward a more perfect union in the 21st century, the lessons of the modern era of statehood provide both inspiration and guidance. The period showed that American democracy is capable of remarkable adaptation and growth, but it also demonstrated the importance of addressing fundamental questions of equality, inclusion, and environmental stewardship. The achievement of the 50-state union represents one of the greatest successes of democratic governance in human history. Still, it also reminds us that democracy is an ongoing process that requires constant vigilance, adaptation, and renewal. The work of creating a more perfect union continues, and the lessons of how America completed itself provide valuable guidance for the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The modern era of American statehood thus stands as both a remarkable achievement and an ongoing challenge, a testament to the possibilities of democratic governance and a reminder of the work that remains to be done. The completion of the American Union in 1959 marked not an end, but a beginning, not a final achievement, but a foundation for continued growth, adaptation, and progress toward the ideals of equality, justice, and democracy for all Americans. The technological revolution and Western development. The admission of the final American states between 1889 and 1959 coincided with and contributed to a technological revolution that transformed not only the American West but the entire world. The unique challenges and opportunities presented by Western geography, climate, and resources drove innovations in transportation, communication, agriculture, mining, and manufacturing that would have global implications for generations to come. The completion of transcontinental railroad networks during this period was perhaps the most important technological achievement that facilitated Western statehood and development. The Northern Pacific Railway, completed in 1883, connected the Great Lakes region to Puget Sound, opening the northern tier of states to large-scale settlement and economic development. The Great Northern Railway, completed in 1893, provided another transcontinental route that facilitated the development of Montana, North Dakota, and Washington. These railroad networks required unprecedented engineering achievements, including the construction of bridges across major rivers, tunnels through mountain ranges, and tracks across vast expanses of prairie and desert. The technology developed for Western railroad construction influenced engineering practices worldwide and demonstrated American capabilities in large-scale infrastructure development. The development of refrigerated railroad cars revolutionized Western agriculture by making it possible to transport perishable goods across vast distances. The ability to ship fresh meat, dairy products, and produce from Western states to Eastern markets transformed American agriculture, creating new opportunities for Western farmers and ranchers. The telegraph networks that accompanied railroad development provided the first reliable long-distance communication system, connecting the Western territories to the rest of the country. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph in 1861 marked the beginning of this process. Still, the expansion of telegraph networks throughout the West during the territorial period created new possibilities for coordination and control across vast distances. The development of telephone networks during the late 19th and early 20th centuries further enhanced communication capabilities. It facilitated the integration of Western states into the national economy and political system. The ability to conduct business and government affairs across thousands of miles made it possible to maintain effective federal governance and national unity despite the enormous geographic scale of the United States. The mining industries that developed in the Western states drove innovations in extraction technology, processing techniques, and transportation systems, which influenced industrial development throughout the world. The deep shaft mining techniques developed in Montana's copper mines, the hydraulic mining methods used in California's gold fields, and the open-pit mining operations that emerged in the 20th century all represented significant technological achievements. The development of new explosives, drilling equipment, and/or processing techniques made it possible to extract minerals from increasingly complex and remote locations. The cyanide process for gold extraction, the flotation process for copper concentration, and other innovations in mineral processing increased the efficiency and profitability of mining operations while also creating new environmental challenges. The agricultural development of Western states required significant technological innovations to overcome the challenges of arid climates, vast distances, and unfamiliar growing conditions. The development of dry farming techniques allowed agriculture to expand into areas that received insufficient rainfall for traditional farming methods. The invention of new farm machinery, including improved plows, harvesters, and threshing machines, made it possible to cultivate vast areas of prairie land with relatively small labor forces. The development of mechanized farming techniques in the Western states influenced agricultural practices worldwide and contributed to significant increases in agricultural productivity. The development of irrigation systems in arid Western states required significant engineering achievements and technological innovations. The construction of dams, canals, and distribution systems transformed desert landscapes into productive agricultural areas, demonstrating American capabilities in large-scale water management projects. The Bureau of Reclamation, established in 1902, pioneered innovative techniques in dam construction, irrigation engineering, and water management that have influenced development projects worldwide. The Hoover Dam, completed in 1936, represented one of the most outstanding engineering achievements of the 20th century, demonstrating the potential for technology to transform natural environments. The development of electric power generation and distribution systems in Western states was closely connected to mining and irrigation projects that required large amounts of energy. The construction of hydroelectric dams provided clean and renewable energy sources that supported industrial development while also demonstrating new approaches to energy production. The development of long-distance power transmission systems made it possible to generate electricity in remote locations and distribute it to population centers hundreds of miles away. These technological innovations influenced energy policy throughout the United States and contributed to the electrification of American society. The aerospace industry that developed in Western states during the 20th century represented one of the most significant technological achievements in human history. The development of aircraft manufacturing in California and Washington, as well as the rocket and missile programs in California and New Mexico, and the space exploration initiatives that emerged during the Cold War, all had their origins in Western technological innovation. The unique geographic and climatic conditions of Western states made them ideal locations for aerospace development and testing. The clear skies, vast open spaces, and stable weather conditions of the Southwest provided ideal conditions for flight testing and space launches. In contrast, the technical universities and research institutions of the West provided the scientific expertise necessary for advanced technological development. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb during World War II, was based mainly in Western states and represented one of the most significant technological achievements in human history. The project's facilities in New Mexico, Washington, and California brought together the world's leading scientists and engineers to solve unprecedented technical challenges. The development of nuclear technology has had profound implications for energy production, medical applications, and national defense, which continue to influence American policy today. The nuclear facilities established in Western states during and after World War II became centers of scientific research and technological innovation, contributing to American leadership in nuclear technology. The development of computer technology and information systems also had essential connections to Western development and military research. The need to process large amounts of data for mining operations, agricultural planning, and military applications drove innovations in computing and data processing that would eventually lead to the information revolution of the late 20th century. The research universities and national laboratories established in the Western states during this period became centers of technological innovation and scientific research, influencing development throughout the United States and the world. Institutions such as the California Institute of Technology, Stanford University, and the Los Alamos National Laboratory played crucial roles in advancing scientific knowledge and technological capabilities. The development of new materials and manufacturing processes in Western states also contributed to technological advancement and industrial development. The aluminum industry that developed in the Pacific Northwest, the steel production facilities established in Western states, and the chemical industries that emerged to support mining and agriculture all represented significant technological advancements. The environmental challenges created by Western development also drove technological innovations in pollution control, waste management, and environmental monitoring. The need to address air and water pollution from mining and industrial activities led to the development of new technologies and techniques that would influence environmental policy throughout the United States. The development of renewable energy technologies, including solar power, wind power, and geothermal energy, was also influenced by the environmental conditions and energy needs of Western states. The abundant sunshine of the Southwest, the strong winds of the Great Plains, and the geothermal resources of the West provided ideal conditions for developing and testing renewable energy technologies. The transportation innovations that emerged during this period also had significant implications for Western development and national integration. The development of improved highway systems, including the interstate highway system, initiated in the 1950s, facilitated the movement of people and goods across vast distances, contributing to the economic integration of the Western states. The development of air transportation was significant for Western states, given their vast distances and sparse populations. The establishment of commercial airlines and the construction of airports throughout the West enabled the maintenance of effective communication and transportation links across the continent. The technological innovations that emerged from Western development during this period established the United States as the world's leading technological power, contributing significantly to American economic and military dominance throughout the 20th century. The research institutions, manufacturing facilities, and technical expertise developed in Western states provided the foundation for continued technological leadership. However, the technological development of Western states also created new challenges and responsibilities that continue to influence American policy today. The environmental costs of technological development, the social disruptions caused by rapid change, and the military applications of new technologies all required new approaches to governance and regulation. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not only the end of territorial expansion but also the culmination of a technological revolution that had transformed the American West and laid the foundation for continued technological leadership. The innovations that emerged from Western development continue to influence American society and the global economy today. The educational and cultural institutions of the West. The development of educational and cultural institutions in the Western states that joined the Union between 1889 and 1959 played a crucial role in creating the intellectual and cultural foundation necessary for democratic governance and economic development. These institutions not only served the immediate needs of growing Western communities but also contributed to the broader development of American education, research, and cultural life. The land-grant colleges established through the Morrill Act of 1862 were significant in Western states, where they provided practical education and scientific research that supported agricultural and industrial development. These institutions, including the University of Montana, North Dakota State University, and Washington State University, became centers of agricultural research and extension services that helped farmers and ranchers adapt to Western conditions. The agricultural experiment stations established in connection with land-grant colleges researched crop varieties, farming techniques, and livestock management specifically adapted to Western climates and conditions. This research contributed to the development of drought-resistant crops, the improvement of irrigation methods, and more efficient farming practices, ultimately increasing agricultural productivity throughout the West. The extension services that land-grant colleges developed brought scientific knowledge directly to farmers and rural communities throughout the West. County agents, demonstration farms, and educational programs helped to disseminate new technologies and techniques that improved agricultural productivity and rural living conditions. The mining schools established in the western states provided the technical education necessary for the development of extractive industries. The Colorado School of Mines, the Montana School of Mines, and similar institutions trained engineers and technicians who developed innovative mining techniques and technologies that significantly influenced industrial development worldwide. These specialized institutions also conducted research in geology, metallurgy, and mining engineering, which contributed to the scientific understanding of mineral resources and extraction techniques. The research conducted at Western mining schools had a significant influence on mining practices throughout the United States and internationally. The regular schools and teachers' colleges established in the Western states played a crucial role in developing the educational systems necessary for democratic governance and social development. These institutions trained teachers who established schools throughout the West, helping to create literate and educated populations that could participate effectively in democratic processes. The development of public school systems in Western states faced unique challenges related to sparse populations, vast distances, and cultural diversity. The one-room schoolhouse became a symbol of Western education, serving scattered rural communities where children of all ages learned together under the guidance of a single teacher. However, Western states also pioneered innovations in educational organization and methodology that influenced educational development throughout the United States. The consolidation of rural schools, the development of transportation systems for students, and the creation of specialized programs for diverse populations all had their origins in Western educational experimentation. The universities established in the Western states during this period became centers of research and cultural development, contributing to the intellectual life of their regions and the nation. The University of Washington, the University of Utah, and other Western universities developed strong programs in fields particularly relevant to Western development, including geology, agriculture, and engineering. These universities also played essential roles in preserving and promoting the cultural heritage of Western communities. The collection and study of Native American cultures, the documentation of pioneer experiences, and the development of regional literature and arts all contributed to the creation of distinctive Western cultural identities. The libraries and museums established in the Western states during this period served important functions in preserving historical records and cultural artifacts, while also providing educational and cultural resources for growing communities. The development of state historical societies, local museums, and public libraries helped to create the cultural infrastructure necessary for educated and engaged citizenship. The cultural institutions that developed in Western cities also contributed to the creation of distinctive regional identities and cultural traditions. Opera houses, theaters, and concert halls brought professional entertainment and cultural programming to Western communities, while local arts organizations and cultural societies provided opportunities for community participation in cultural activities. The development of Western literature and arts during this period reflected the unique experiences and landscapes of Western states, while also contributing to the broader development of American culture. Writers such as Willa Cather, John Steinbeck, and Wallace Stegner captured the distinctive characteristics of Western life and helped to create enduring images of the American West. The visual arts that developed in the Western states also reflected the influence of Western landscapes and experiences. The paintings of Western artists, the photography of Western landscapes, and the development of distinctive architectural styles all contributed to the creation of regional cultural identities that influenced American culture more broadly. The development of journalism and publishing in the Western states played a crucial role in shaping informed public opinion and fostering democratic participation. Western newspapers served not only as sources of information but also as forums for public debate and community organization. The ethnic and cultural diversity of Western states also contributed to the development of multicultural educational and cultural institutions that were unique in American history. The preservation of Native American languages and cultures, the maintenance of Hispanic cultural traditions, and the development of Asian American cultural institutions all contributed to the creation of more inclusive and diverse educational and cultural environments. However, the development of educational and cultural institutions in Western states also reflected the discriminatory attitudes and practices that characterized American society during this period. The segregation of schools, the exclusion of minority groups from cultural institutions, and the suppression of non-English languages all demonstrated the limitations of American democratic ideals. The boarding schools that were established for Native American children represented particularly problematic attempts to use education as a tool of cultural assimilation and control. These institutions sought to eliminate Native American languages and cultures and replace them with European American values and practices, causing lasting damage to Native American communities. However, many Western educational and cultural institutions also served as centers of progressive reform and social change. The women's colleges established in the Western states, the adult education programs that served immigrant communities, and the cultural organizations that promoted social reform all contributed to the expansion of democratic participation and social justice. The development of scientific research institutions in Western states during the 20th century contributed to American leadership in science and technology, while also addressing practical problems related to Western development. The national laboratories established during and after World War II, the agricultural research stations that developed new crops and farming techniques, and the medical research institutions that addressed health problems in Western communities all contributed to scientific advancement and practical problem-solving. The environmental research conducted at Western institutions also contributed to the development of conservation and environmental protection policies that influenced national policy. The study of arid lands, research on wildlife management, and the development of sustainable resource use practices all originated in Western research institutions. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not just the end of territorial expansion but the culmination of a process of institutional development that had created the educational and cultural foundation necessary for democratic governance and continued development. The institutions established in the Western states during this period continue to play essential roles in American education, research, and cultural life today. The legacy of Western statehood in contemporary America. As we conclude our examination of the modern era of American statehood, it is essential to consider how the admission of the final 26 states between 1889 and 1959 continues to influence American politics, society, and culture in the 21st century. The legacy of Western statehood extends far beyond the simple addition of territory to encompass fundamental changes in American federalism, democracy, and national identity that continue to shape contemporary American life. The federal system that emerged from the process of Western statehood established patterns of federal-state relations that continue to influence American governance today. The equal representation of states in the Senate, regardless of population, gives Western states disproportionate political influence that affects national policy on issues ranging from environmental protection to energy development to federal spending. The political influence of Western states has been particularly significant in recent decades, as issues such as water rights, public land management, and energy development have become increasingly important in national politics. The perspectives and interests of Western states on these issues often differ significantly from those of Eastern and Midwestern states, creating ongoing tensions within the federal system. The environmental legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American environmental policy and global environmental leadership. The national parks, forests, and wilderness areas that were established during the period of Western expansion remain essential components of America's natural heritage and continue to attract millions of visitors from around the world. However, the environmental problems created by Western development also continue to require ongoing attention and resources. The cleanup of mining sites, the restoration of damaged ecosystems, and the management of water resources in arid regions all represent continuing challenges that stem from the period of rapid Western development. The cultural diversity introduced to American society through Western statehood continues to influence American culture and identity in the 21st century. The multicultural heritage of states such as Hawaii, New Mexico, and California has contributed to America's emergence as a truly diverse and inclusive society. However, the struggle for full equality and inclusion continues. The Native American communities of Western states continue to play essential roles in American society and politics, maintaining their cultural traditions while also participating in contemporary American life. The sovereignty rights of tribal governments, the preservation of Native American languages and cultures, and the protection of sacred sites all remain essential issues that reflect the ongoing legacy of Western expansion. The Hispanic communities of southwestern states have become increasingly important in American politics and culture, contributing to the growth of Latino political influence and the development of bilingual and multicultural institutions. The demographic changes that are transforming states such as Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada reflect broader national trends toward increased diversity and multiculturalism. The Asian American communities of Western states, particularly in Hawaii and California, have also made significant contributions to American society and culture while maintaining connections to their countries of origin. These communities have played crucial roles in fostering trade relationships between the United States and Asia, while also contributing to American technological and cultural advancements. The economic legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American economic development and global competitiveness. The natural resources of Western states remain essential components of American energy production and industrial development. In contrast, the technological innovations that emerged from Western development continue to drive American economic growth. The aerospace industry, which developed in the Western states during the 20th century, continues to be a significant component of American technological leadership and economic competitiveness. The research institutions, manufacturing facilities, and technical expertise developed in Western states provide the foundation for continued American leadership in aerospace technology and space exploration. The agricultural productivity of Western states continues to contribute to American food security and agricultural exports, although changing climate conditions and water availability present new challenges for Western agriculture. The development of sustainable farming practices and water conservation techniques remains a top priority for Western states and the nation as a whole. The energy resources of Western states, including oil, natural gas, coal, and renewable energy sources, continue to play a crucial role in American energy policy and global energy markets. The development of renewable energy technologies in Western states has contributed to the United States' leadership in clean energy development and climate change mitigation. The political innovations pioneered in Western states continue to influence American democracy and political development. The direct democracy mechanisms developed in Western states, including the initiative, referendum, and recall, have been adopted by states throughout the country and continue to provide opportunities for citizen participation in governance. The expansion of voting rights that began in Western states, including the adoption of women's suffrage and other democratic reforms, established precedents that influenced national political development and contributed to the ongoing expansion of democratic participation. The struggle for voting rights and political equality continues to be influenced by the precedents established during the period of Western statehood. The federal land management policies that were developed during the period of Western expansion continue to influence American environmental policy and public land management. The national forests, parks, and other public lands established in Western states remain important components of American environmental protection and recreation, although debates over their management and use continue. The water rights and management systems developed in the Western states continue to influence American water policy and interstate relations. The complex legal and institutional frameworks that govern water use in the West provide models for water management in other arid regions while also creating ongoing challenges for sustainable development. The transportation and communication networks developed to connect the Western states to the rest of the country continue to influence American infrastructure development and regional integration. The interstate highway system, the transcontinental railroads, and the telecommunications networks that connect Western states remain essential components of American economic and social integration. Research institutions and universities established in Western states continue to play crucial roles in American scientific and technological development. The national laboratories, research universities, and technology centers established in the Western states provide the foundation for continued American leadership in science and technology. The cultural institutions and traditions that developed in Western states continue to influence American culture and identity. The literature, arts, and popular culture that emerged from Western experiences continue to shape American cultural expression and global perceptions of American society. However, the legacy of Western statehood also includes ongoing challenges and unresolved issues that continue to influence American society and politics. The discrimination and inequality that characterized the period of Western expansion continue to affect minority communities and require ongoing efforts to address. The environmental degradation resulting from rapid Western development continues to require cleanup and restoration efforts that will extend for generations. The sustainable management of natural resources and the protection of environmental quality remain essential challenges that require continued attention and innovation. The economic inequalities created by the boom and bust cycles of extractive industries continue to affect Western communities and require new approaches to economic development and diversification. The dependence on natural resource extraction and federal spending that characterizes many Western states creates ongoing vulnerabilities that require careful management. The political tensions between federal authority and state autonomy that emerged during the period of Western expansion continue to influence American federalism and intergovernmental relations. The balance between national standards and local control remains a source of ongoing debate and conflict in American politics. As Americans continue to work toward a more perfect union in the 21st century, the lessons and legacy of Western statehood provide both inspiration and guidance. The period demonstrated the remarkable capacity of American institutions to adapt and evolve while maintaining their essential character and purpose. Still, it also revealed the ongoing challenges of governing a diverse and complex continental nation. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not the end of American development, but the beginning of a new phase in which the nation would have to address the challenges and opportunities of governing a fully developed continental democracy. The success of this ongoing experiment continues to depend on Americans' ability to learn from the past while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The story of how America's final states joined the Union thus provides essential insights into the nature of American democracy, the challenges of federal governance, and the ongoing work of creating a more perfect union. Understanding this history is crucial for addressing contemporary challenges and for ensuring that the promise of American democracy is fulfilled for all citizens. The legacy of Western statehood reminds us that American democracy is not a finished product but an ongoing experiment that requires the active participation of every generation. The achievements and failures of the period of Western expansion provide both inspiration and warning for contemporary Americans as they work to address the challenges of the 21st century and to fulfill the promise of equality, justice, and democracy for all. The modern era of American statehood, from 1889 to 1959, thus represents one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of democratic governance. The successful admission of 26 diverse states, each with its unique challenges and contributions, demonstrated the extraordinary flexibility and adaptability of American federal institutions while also revealing the ongoing tensions and contradictions that continue to characterize American democracy. The Great Plains states that were admitted in the 1890s brought vast agricultural potential and immigrant populations that enriched American society while also creating new challenges for democratic governance across enormous distances and sparse populations. The development of these states required innovations in transportation, communication, and government organization that influenced American development for generations. The mountain states of the Intermountain West contributed essential natural resources. They pioneered democratic innovations such as women's suffrage and direct democracy that expanded American concepts of citizenship and political participation. However, these states also experienced the boom and bust cycles and environmental degradation that characterized extractive economies, creating ongoing challenges for sustainable development. The southwestern states of New Mexico and Arizona have large Hispanic populations and distinctive cultural traditions that challenge traditional assumptions about American identity, while also demonstrating the capacity of American democracy to accommodate cultural diversity. The long struggle for statehood in these territories reflected broader national debates about race, ethnicity, and citizenship that continue to influence American politics today. The final admission of Alaska and Hawaii in 1959 represented the ultimate test of American democratic flexibility and inclusion. These two states, with their unique geographic locations, diverse populations, and strategic importance, required new approaches to federal governance that expanded the definition of American citizenship and demonstrated the global reach of American democracy. The economic transformation that accompanied Western statehood provided the natural resources, strategic locations, and technological innovations that established the United States as the world's leading economic and military power. However, this development also created environmental problems and social inequalities that continue to require attention and remediation. The social and cultural changes brought about by Western statehood enriched American society with unprecedented diversity, while also creating new challenges for democratic inclusion and social cohesion. The struggles of minority communities for equal rights and recognition, the preservation of cultural traditions, and the development of multicultural institutions all reflected the ongoing evolution of American identity and values. The political innovations pioneered in Western states, including expanded voting rights, direct democracy mechanisms, and new approaches to representation, influenced American political development and contributed to the ongoing expansion of democratic participation. However, these innovations also revealed the tensions between different concepts of democracy and the challenges of governing a diverse continental nation. The environmental legacy of Western statehood encompasses both the establishment of national parks and protected areas that preserve America's natural heritage and the environmental problems created by rapid development, which continue to require cleanup and restoration efforts. The balance between economic development and environmental protection remains a central challenge for Western states and the nation as a whole. The international dimensions of Western statehood contributed to America's emergence as a global power while also creating new responsibilities and challenges for American foreign policy. The strategic locations, natural resources, and diverse populations of Western states continue to play essential roles in American global engagement and leadership. As we reflect on the completion of the American Union in 1959, we are reminded that this achievement represented not just the addition of territory but the fulfillment of a democratic experiment that had tested the limits of federal governance, democratic inclusion, and national unity for more than a century and a half. The success of this experiment required the vision of political leaders, the sacrifices of ordinary citizens, and the flexibility of American institutions in adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American life in the 21st century, from the federal system that governs the relationship between national and state authority to the ongoing struggles for equality and inclusion that reflect the diverse heritage of the American people. Understanding this history is essential for appreciating the achievements and limitations of American democracy and for addressing the challenges that face the nation in the contemporary world. The story of how America's final states joined the Union ultimately reminds us that American democracy is not a finished product but an ongoing experiment that requires the active participation of every generation to fulfill its promise for all citizens. The achievements and failures of the modern era of statehood offer both inspiration and guidance for contemporary Americans as they strive to create a more perfect union and address the challenges of governing a diverse and complex continental democracy in an interconnected global world. The completion of the 50-state union in 1959 marked not an end, but a beginning, not a final achievement, but a foundation for continued growth, adaptation, and progress toward the ideals of equality, justice, and democracy that have always defined the American experiment. The work of creating a more perfect union continues, and the lessons of how America completed itself provide essential guidance for the ongoing challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in the 21st century and beyond. The transformation of the American West from a collection of territories to fully integrated states represent one of the most successful examples of democratic expansion and institutional adaptation in world history. The process required not only the extension of political institutions across vast distances but also the integration of diverse populations, the development of new economic systems, and the creation of cultural and educational institutions that could serve the needs of rapidly growing and changing communities. The technological innovations that emerged from Western development, ranging from railroad construction to mining techniques and agricultural methods, established the United States as a global leader in industrial and technological advancements. The research institutions, universities, and national laboratories established in the Western states continue to drive American innovation and scientific leadership in the 21st century. The environmental challenges created by Western development also contributed to the emergence of conservation and environmental protection movements that have influenced global environmental policy. The national parks system, the development of sustainable resource management practices, and the recognition of environmental limits all had their origins in the Western experience and continue to influence American environmental leadership. The cultural contributions of Western states, from literature and arts to popular culture and entertainment, have enriched American society while also shaping global perceptions of American identity and values. The multicultural heritage of Western states has contributed to America's emergence as a diverse and inclusive society, though the struggle for full equality and recognition continues. The political innovations pioneered in Western states, including expanded voting rights, direct democracy mechanisms, and new approaches to representation and governance, have influenced democratic development throughout the United States and around the world. The Western experience demonstrated that democracy could adapt to new conditions and challenges while maintaining its essential character and values. However, the legacy of Western statehood also includes ongoing challenges and unresolved issues that continue to influence American society and politics. The discrimination and inequality that characterized the period of Western expansion, the environmental degradation that resulted from rapid development, and the economic vulnerabilities created by dependence on extractive industries all represent continuing challenges that require ongoing attention and innovation. The federal system that emerged from Western statehood, with its balance between national authority and state autonomy, continues to provide a framework for governing a diverse continental nation while also creating ongoing tensions and conflicts over the proper role of government at different levels. The equal representation of states in the Senate, regardless of population, gives Western states disproportionate political influence that continues to affect national policy and political development. The completion of the American Union in 1959 with the admission of Alaska and Hawaii marked the culmination of more than 2 centuries of territorial expansion and democratic development. The 50-state union that emerged from this process represents one of the most successful examples of federal governance and democratic inclusion in world history. However, it also reveals the ongoing challenges of governing a diverse and complex society. As Americans continue to work toward a more perfect union in the 21st century, the lessons and legacy of Western statehood provide essential guidance for addressing contemporary challenges and opportunities. The period demonstrated both the remarkable achievements and the significant limitations of American democracy, showing what could be accomplished through vision, determination, and institutional flexibility while also revealing the costs of rapid change and the persistence of inequality and injustice. The story of how America's final states joined the Union thus provides crucial insights into the nature of democratic governance, the challenges of federal systems, and the ongoing effort to create inclusive and sustainable societies. Understanding this history is essential for appreciating the achievements of American democracy while also recognizing the work that remains to be done to fulfill its promise for all citizens. The modern era of American statehood ultimately established the United States as a continental democracy with the resources, diversity, and institutional capacity necessary for global leadership, while also creating the challenges and responsibilities that continue to define American development in the contemporary world. The success of this great democratic experiment continues to depend on the ability of each generation to learn from the past while adapting to new challenges and working toward the ideals of equality, justice, and democracy for all Americans. The completion of the 50-state union represents both a remarkable achievement and an ongoing challenge, a testament to the possibilities of democratic governance and a reminder of the work that remains to be done. The legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American life. It provides essential lessons for the ongoing effort to create a more perfect union that fulfills the promise of American democracy for all citizens in the 21st century and beyond. The journey from territorial status to full statehood for these final 26 states represents a remarkable testament to the adaptability and resilience of American democratic institutions. Each state faced unique challenges in achieving admission to the Union, from the harsh climate and sparse population of Alaska to the multicultural complexity of Hawaii, from the labor conflicts of Idaho to the religious controversies of Utah, from the cultural diversity of New Mexico to the pioneering of women's suffrage in Wyoming. These challenges tested the flexibility of American federalism and demonstrated the capacity of democratic institutions to evolve and adapt while maintaining their essential character. The successful resolution of these diverse challenges showed that American democracy could accommodate vast geographic differences, cultural diversity, economic variations, and social innovations while still maintaining national unity and shared democratic values. The economic development that accompanied Western statehood transformed not only the Western regions but also the entire American economy, providing the natural resources, transportation networks, and technological innovations that established the United States as the world's leading industrial power. The copper mines of Montana, the wheat fields of the Dakotas, the oil wells of Oklahoma, the forests of Washington, and the strategic location of Hawaii all contributed essential elements to American economic growth and global competitiveness. The social and cultural transformation brought about by Western statehood enriched American society with unprecedented diversity, while also creating new models for multicultural democracy. The successful integration of immigrant communities on the Great Plains, the preservation of Hispanic culture in the Southwest, the multicultural society of Hawaii, and the adaptation of Native American communities all demonstrated new possibilities for inclusive democracy and cultural pluralism. The political innovations pioneered in Western states influenced American political development and contributed to the expansion of democratic participation nationwide. The direct democracy mechanisms developed in Western states, the expansion of voting rights to include women, and the creation of new approaches to representation and governance all established precedents that would influence American political development for generations to come. The environmental legacy of Western statehood includes both remarkable achievements in conservation and preservation and significant challenges in environmental restoration and protection. The establishment of national parks and protected areas preserved some of America's most spectacular natural landscapes for future generations, while the environmental damage caused by mining, logging, and agricultural development created ongoing challenges that continue to require attention and resources. The international dimensions of Western statehood contributed to America's emergence as a global power, establishing the geographic and strategic foundation for American leadership in world affairs. The Pacific Coast states provided bases for American engagement with Asia, the southwestern states established connections with Latin America, and Alaska and Hawaii extended American strategic reach into the Arctic and Pacific regions. The technological innovations that emerged from Western development established the United States as a global leader in science and technology, from the mining and agricultural techniques developed in the 19th century to the aerospace and nuclear technologies developed in the 20th century. Research institutions and universities established in the Western states continue to drive American innovation and technological leadership in the contemporary world. The educational and cultural institutions developed in Western states created the intellectual and cultural foundation necessary for democratic governance and continued development. The land-grant colleges, research universities, libraries, museums, and cultural organizations established in Western states not only served local communities but also contributed to the broader development of American education and culture. However, the legacy of Western statehood also includes ongoing challenges and unresolved issues that continue to influence American society and politics. The discrimination and inequality experienced by minority communities, the environmental degradation caused by rapid development, the economic vulnerabilities created by dependence on extractive industries, and the political tensions between federal authority and state autonomy all represent continuing challenges that require ongoing attention and innovation. The federal system that emerged from Western statehood continues to provide a framework for governing a diverse continental nation while also creating ongoing tensions over the proper balance between national standards and local control. The equal representation of states in the Senate gives Western states disproportionate political influence, which continues to affect national policy. Meanwhile, the diversity of economic interests and cultural values among the states creates ongoing challenges for national unity and coherent policy-making. The completion of the American Union in 1959 marked not the end of American development but the beginning of a new phase in which the nation would have to address the challenges of governing a completed continental democracy in an increasingly interconnected world. The Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, the environmental movement, and other developments of the late 20th century all built upon the foundation established during the era of Western statehood. As we reflect on this remarkable period of American expansion and development, we are reminded that the success of the American democratic experiment has always depended on the ability of each generation to adapt democratic institutions to new challenges while maintaining their essential character and values. The period of Western statehood demonstrated both the remarkable achievements possible through democratic governance and the ongoing challenges of creating inclusive and sustainable societies. The story of how America's final states joined the Union provides essential lessons for contemporary Americans as they work to address the challenges of the 21st century. The period showed that American democracy is capable of remarkable adaptation and growth. Still, it also demonstrated the importance of addressing fundamental questions of equality, inclusion, environmental stewardship, and sustainable development. The legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American life in countless ways, from the federal system that governs the relationship between national and state authority to the ongoing struggles for equality and inclusion that reflect the diverse heritage of the American people. Understanding this history is crucial for appreciating both the achievements and limitations of American democracy and for addressing the contemporary challenges that the nation faces. The completion of the 50-state union represents one of the most outstanding achievements in the history of democratic governance, demonstrating that it is possible to extend democratic institutions across vast distances and diverse populations while maintaining national unity and shared values. However, this achievement also reminds us that democracy is an ongoing process that requires constant vigilance, adaptation, and renewal to fulfill its promise for all citizens. The modern era of American statehood thus stands as both a remarkable success story and an ongoing challenge, a testament to the possibilities of democratic governance and a reminder of the work that remains to be done. As Americans continue to work toward a more perfect union, the lessons of Western statehood provide both inspiration and guidance for the ongoing effort to create a society that fulfills the promise of equality, justice, and democracy for all. The transformation of America from a collection of 13 coastal colonies to a continental union of 50 diverse states represents one of the most remarkable achievements in human political organization. The modern era of statehood, from 1889 to 1959, completed this transformation and established the United States as a truly continental democracy with the geographic scope, natural resources, and institutional capacity necessary for global leadership. The process of Western statehood required not only the extension of political institutions across vast distances but also the integration of diverse populations, the the development of new economic systems, and the creation of social and cultural institutions that could serve the needs of rapidly growing and changing communities. The success of this process demonstrated the remarkable flexibility and adaptability of American democratic institutions while also revealing the ongoing challenges of governing a diverse and complex society. The states that joined the Union during this period brought unprecedented diversity to American society, including Native American communities with ancient cultural traditions, Hispanic populations with distinctive languages and customs, Asian American communities with connections to distant homelands, and immigrant groups from throughout Europe and beyond. The successful integration of these diverse populations, while not without conflict and discrimination, demonstrated new possibilities for multicultural democracy and inclusive citizenship. The economic contributions of Western states provided the foundation for America's emergence as the world's leading industrial and economic power. The natural resources extracted from Western mines, the agricultural products grown on Western farms and ranches, the timber harvested from Western forests, and the strategic advantages provided by Western locations all contributed essential elements to American economic development and global competitiveness. The technological innovations that emerged from Western development established the United States as a global leader in science and technology. From the mining and transportation technologies of the 19th century to the aerospace and nuclear technologies of the 20th century, Western states served as centers of innovation and technological advancement that influenced development worldwide. The political innovations pioneered in Western states expanded American concepts of democracy and citizenship, while also influencing the nation's political development. The expansion of voting rights, the development of direct democracy mechanisms, and the creation of new approaches to representation and governance all established precedents that continue to influence American political development today. The environmental legacy of Western statehood includes both remarkable achievements in conservation and preservation and significant challenges in environmental restoration and protection. The national parks, forests, and wilderness areas established in Western states preserve some of America's most spectacular natural landscapes. At the same time, the environmental problems created by rapid development continue to require ongoing attention and resources. The cultural contributions of Western states have enriched American society and influenced global perceptions of American identity and values. The literature, arts, and popular culture that emerged from Western experiences continue to shape American cultural expression. In contrast, the multicultural heritage of Western states has contributed to America's emergence as a diverse and inclusive society. However, the legacy of Western statehood also includes ongoing challenges and unresolved issues that continue to influence American society and politics. The discrimination and inequality experienced by minority communities during the period of Western expansion created lasting inequities that require ongoing efforts to address. The environmental degradation caused by rapid development created problems that continue to require expensive cleanup and restoration efforts. The economic vulnerabilities created by dependence on extractive industries continue to impact Western communities, necessitating new approaches to economic diversification and sustainable development. The political tensions between federal authority and state autonomy that emerged during the period of Western expansion continue to influence American federalism and intergovernmental relations. The federal system that emerged from Western statehood provides a framework for governing a diverse continental nation, while also creating ongoing challenges for national unity and coherent policymaking. The equal representation of states in the Senate gives Western states disproportionate political influence, which continues to affect national policy. Meanwhile, the diversity of economic interests and cultural values among the states creates ongoing tensions within the federal system. As Americans continue to work toward a more perfect union in the 21st century, the lessons and legacy of Western statehood provide essential guidance for addressing contemporary challenges and opportunities. The period demonstrated that American democracy is capable of remarkable adaptation and growth. Still, it also revealed the importance of addressing fundamental questions of equality, inclusion, environmental stewardship, and sustainable development. The completion of the American Union in 1959 marked not the end of American development but the beginning of a new phase in which the nation would have to address the challenges of governing a completed continental democracy in an increasingly interconnected and complex world. The success of this ongoing experiment continues to depend on Americans' ability to learn from the past while adapting to new challenges and working toward the ideals that have always defined the American experiment. The story of how America's final states joined the Union thus provides crucial insights into the nature of democratic governance, the challenges of federal systems, and the ongoing effort to create inclusive and sustainable societies. Understanding this history is essential for appreciating both the achievements and limitations of American democracy while also recognizing the work that remains to be done to fulfill its promise for all citizens. The modern era of American statehood ultimately represents both a remarkable achievement and an ongoing challenge, a testament to the possibilities of democratic governance and a reminder of the work that remains to be done. The legacy of Western statehood continues to influence American life. It provides essential lessons for the ongoing effort to create a more perfect union that fulfills the promise of American democracy for all citizens in the 21st century and beyond. The completion of the 50-state union stands as one of humanity's most outstanding achievements in democratic governance, demonstrating that it is possible to extend democratic institutions across vast distances and diverse populations while maintaining national unity and shared democratic values. This remarkable accomplishment required the vision of countless leaders, the sacrifices of ordinary citizens, and the flexibility of American institutions in adapting to new challenges and opportunities while preserving their essential character and democratic purpose. The journey from territorial status to full statehood for America's final states tested every aspect of American democracy and federalism, from the capacity to govern across enormous distances to the ability to integrate diverse populations and cultures into a unified national community. The successful completion of this process established the United States as a model for democratic governance and federal systems worldwide. However, this achievement also reminds us that democracy is not a destination but a journey, not a completed project but an ongoing experiment that requires the active participation and commitment of every generation. The work of creating a more perfect union continues, and the lessons learned from the modern era of American statehood provide essential guidance for addressing the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in our continuing effort to fulfill the promise of American democracy for all citizens. The legacy of the modern era of American statehood thus extends far beyond the simple addition of territory to encompass fundamental transformations in American society, politics, economy, and culture that continue to shape the nation today. The 26 states that joined the Union between 1889 and 1959 brought not only vast territories and natural resources but also diverse populations, innovative institutions, and new approaches to democratic governance that enriched and strengthened American democracy while also revealing its ongoing challenges and limitations. As we conclude this examination of how America completed its union, we are reminded that the story of American statehood is ultimately the story of American democracy itself, a continuing experiment in self-governance that has proven remarkably adaptable and resilient while also requiring constant vigilance and renewal to fulfill its promise of equality, justice, and opportunity for all Americans.